Councillors, Growth and Infrastructure Meeting, 29th of May. I have apologies from Councillor Southgate, Councillor Pascoe and Councillor Mallett for being here. No. And that's moved enthusiastically by Councillor James and seconded by Councillor Siggy. Are there any other apologies? No, Gary came up to me and said, I'm no longer late. So I said, well, you'll have to apologise for something. How about for being here? Okay, those in favour, against, carried. Councillors, confirmation of the agenda. Now, there's two things. One is the timing of various things. We've got the NZTA delegation, we've invited them to come at 11, so the idea is that morning tea at 10:45ish and finish that at 11, come straight back in here and go on to their report, which is it's number 7. So we might juggle things to suit that, and then we've got what have we got? Something at 1:30. Sorry.
That was just so that say HCBA.
Oh, and that was so that HCBA could be here for the parking report, but they are no longer available because they have something in Auckland today, a submission that they're having to give there, so that's not an issue. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the Chair's report. So you'll see a note there that the Chair's report is be accepted as a late item. This is part of the confirmation of the agenda. That there are items, there's one item in there in particular relating to future-proof that needs to be settled before a delegation goes to the meet with the government on the 25th of June, which is before the next G&I meeting. So that's the reason for the urgency for that. The other aspect of that is that major part of my report, which was the report from the regional council meeting, that meeting didn't actually take place until Friday, finished on Friday afternoon, so I wasn't able to write that part of the report until the weekend. So that's the reasons for lateness there. And another one, that item 10 and item 11, which relate to the speed limits, be dealt with together as one item. So with those 3 points, A, B and C, you'll see listed on your page with all the blue shading. I'll move confirmation of the agenda, seconded by Councillor Mark. Is there any discussion on that? If not, those in favour, against, carried, thanks. Any declarations of interest? Public forum. Sian's not coming? Okay. Right. We were possibly going to have a public forum, but obviously not. Confirmation of the Growth and Infrastructure open minutes, page 6, councillors. And I'll move that, and seconded by Councillor Taylor. Is there any discussion or issues to come up to do with that? Gary, thanks.
Page 9.
Yep.
Halfway down in the italics, there's a whole lot of people leaving meetings and leaving and going the meeting. Just under the same, so under the General Manager's report, says Councillor Southgate joined the meeting at 10 AM. Councillor Mallett, that's me, left at 3 PM. And then Rob Pascoe left at 3:30 PM. How can
the General Manager's report, actually, if you remember at that meeting,
did it get split up or something?
The right answer got split over a number of times because they had different items. So that was during discussion of that item that those things happened, but the item itself was here, there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Makes
so
sense.
I just couldn't follow how that was working. Yeah.
You didn't think that one item would take that long?
No. No, it was your item. I knew it would take that long.
Okay, any other questions or queries? If not, I'll put the resolution that those minutes be accepted. Those in favour, against, carried. So, councillors, we'll go to the Chair's report, which is it's headed electronically addendum agenda of ordinary Growth and Infrastructure meeting. I'm not sure whether that's what it's called on your hard copies, but it's got the front page. Sorry, it's in yellow there. Cover page, thanks. Councillors, just 3 parts to it. One was in relation to the Traffins conference, which is coming up in November, and 4 councillors and a number of staff went to that last year, and it's usually quite popular, and already I've had 3 councillors indicate their interest in going to that this year. My recommendation to the committee is that we approve a funded by resolution, as it's called, delegation of 2 positions, but that as many councillors who wish to register do so, and that those 2 positions funding be spread across all of our councillors that go, which is what we did last year, just so that the balance of that is paid for by the councillors' training and their own councillors' training and conference budget. Is that what it's called? Yeah. Yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. But I'm just trying to say that we'll officially pay for 2 out of the council budget, but out of your training budget, others can attend, and we'll spread that evenly amongst all 3. Well, yeah, I've just arrived late. It's going to record me as being a late arrival. So, were there any questions on that? That's something we did with a couple of conferences last year to try and make it as fair as possible to everyone's training budget. Okay, so other than that, it's entirely up to councillors whether they register or not, but please do so through Becca. She'll receive your emails or notices, or Amy. Sorry, Leo.
Just one question, Chair. I'll be going as I'm a member of the executive of Traffins, so would that make it 3, or of course I could take that straight out of my budget?
Well, I think you should get the same share that everyone else does, because you're, as well as an executive, you're a representative of ours. But
well,
I think you can negotiate that with Becca and, you know, work that out. So either way, we're encouraging you to go. Governance Manager?
Well, certainly the opportunity presents for anyone who was effectively was appointed under the governance structure, effectively to be covered by conference by resolution anyway.
Oh, okay.
So
that would be an additional one, would it?
We can easily manage that and appropriately manage it that way if you choose. Yes,
because Leo, you were officially listed at the start of the triennium as our official. You were appointed to the executive on behalf of the City Council, not like just elected subsequent to the. That was one of the appointments right at the start. So you're a special case.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, that's that. The future-proof, and Blair has helped me with this. You'll see some of the issues. Blair did provide more information, but I cut that down because there wasn't enough paper left in the council to print it all. No, I'm just joking. If there are questions on that and the recommendations that Blair and myself have put together, the end there, please ask now. We'll put the resolutions later on, following the discussion. So questions? Sorry, I've got Gary first.
Thanks, Dave. Look, I've read the paragraph. So you're talking about paragraphs 2, 3 and 4, is that right?
They're recommendations, yes. Yeah, with the 2 paragraphs of explanation above them. Okay.
Just could you just, I find it very confusing. And you're asking future-proof to do a zillion things, I think.
Yeah, look, future-proof is the spatial plan for the sub-region, which happens to now cover.
That's the guy Tremaine.
Ken Tremaine is the consultant, and Bill Wasley is the chair of Future-proof.
Sorry, Bill, that's right.
Yes. So the 2 of them, plus representatives from the 4 councils and NZTA.
Yes.
But they're now covering a number of other things like the Hamilton to Auckland Growth Corridor. And Blair might want to jump in here to explain that, because I agree that it's not so much confusing, it's sort of growing like Topsy in what it covers.
Well, the paragraph 2 it's got one of the longest sentences ever delivered in English history. The ability to provide greater supply beyond what is currently contemplated. So that's housing supply, I suppose, is it? Is that what we're talking about? It's not clear what it is.
It's both housing and industrial land.
Okay.
So I think the context, Councillors and Councillor Mallett, is that in the last 6 to 12 months, a lot has changed. New government urban growth agenda. We've got significant growth. We've got the Auckland-Hamilton Corridor Plan, which is an item we'll talk about in the GM's report. Waikato District Council have their district plan out shortly. So around Hamilton and between Hamilton and Auckland, there are significant things happening in the growth space. And so what these recommendations are doing is really giving the mandate to Chair Dave and Mayor Andrew, who are our two representatives on Future Proof, to ensure that discussions and outcomes around Hamilton, and particularly with the neighbouring councils, are providing the right outcomes for the long-term planning for Greater Hamilton area.
Okay, so at the moment, like Future Proof is not a new thing. It's been around for quite a while, and it has provided information and resource, like information about a lot of development going up there. Are you just saying that, heck, lots changed? Maybe your current recommendations and/or plan, I don't know if they provide us a plan or anything, but your current recommendations may be out of date. Is that all you're saying?
I think yes. I mean, not necessarily out of date, but a lot has changed. It's a very flexible environment. Yep. We have new government initiatives, and I want to make sure Council is giving a clear mandate to our two representatives, and I guess myself as well as the executive representative, to ensure that we're having the robust conversations to get the right outcomes for growth in and around the Greater Hamilton area. I mean, I'm less concerned, Gary, about growth to the north, Pokeno, Tuakau. That's more of a Waikato, but certainly growth around Ngārawahia, all the communities around Hamilton, Horatu, Taupere, etc. Really important to Hamilton. Really important that we get the right advocacy position, and we're taking the right position in terms of our neighbouring councils working, and I guess making a very clear position as to what's important for the Greater Hamilton. So that's what these recommendations are about. And certainly we are already doing that. I'm having those conversations, so is Andrew and Dave, but I think it's important that we just anchor it here with a resolution to capture that.
So I see the Te Awa Lakes gets a mention there. So that's a possible big development on the border that we just want to inform Future Proof it's happening, or could potentially happen. Well,
Future Proof made a submission to that late last year, and what this is just saying is a lot has changed in that time to the private plan change, and it's appropriate that Future Proof just reconsider its position on that matter. I mean, since that time, Gary, a lot of information has been received, a lot's happened, and it's really just saying to Future Proof, we think it's appropriate that you just review your position on that submission.
Okay. Their submission, I might add, Gary, was based on their existing spatial plan for the sub-region they had, and which said where industrial should be and so forth, but a special housing area overrides that, so that was part of the disconnect slightly.
Okay.
But I think our whole planning environment, Gary, is becoming far more, as the words chairs use, nimble, flexible. The government is asking us to be that. We've got to balance that with our role as a consenting authority and putting infrastructure, but nonetheless, we need to be able to have the right positions that we can advocate for at the district table.
All right. Thank you. I won't say I understand it, but I think I know where you're going.
Direction of travel, yeah. Okay, sorry, Martin, Councillor.
Well, I have a comment, not a question, so it's up to you when you want to take it.
Look, let's do those recommendations which are officially listed on the front page in the yellow under Future Proof. Let's do them now while we're in the discussion.
Dave, you see them in yellow, what do you mean? Oh, you mean under this yellow cover?
Yeah, they've just been transposed. Oh, sorry, it's different on your... It's the front...
No, I think it's...
No, yeah, I'm looking at my report as opposed to the staff cover page. The staff cover page, the councillors have got that.
So can you just give us a paragraph number?
Yeah, page 3 of 5. Yep. Future Proof 234. I think it makes sense if we do them now while we've just had the discussion. So I'll move them. No, I'm just taking a mover and second. I'm not closing it off.
Still got more questions before we do that?
I'll move it anyway to get it on the table.
Don't take a seconder yet.
Yeah, seconder.
Don't take a seconder yet. I might want to make a change to your report. That's what my question is, Dave.
Okay.
So what I want to ask is, would you be comfortable to add into your report that Hamilton City Council looks into and possibly has a briefing on it and a report onto whether future-proof is still fit for purpose in its current form?
Look, I think that that's outside the realm of this, which is to do with what future-proof is doing right now. I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I think that's a new thing that rather than the Growth and Infrastructure Committee, the whole of council should be looking at that, and perhaps my suggestion might be the mid-term review, which happens in a month or two, rather than, because that's a higher level discussion than this one, which is about the activities of future-proof. So I think that's different from what we're talking about here. This assumes future-proof is in existence. That questions whether we should even be having a future-proof involvement.
No, I'm just asking whether in its current form it's fit for purpose, because what you're trying to do is patch it up with what you're proposing. Whereas I'm asking to have a look at a bigger picture. I mean, the future-proof has been running amok and doing things without this council even knowing on our behalf.
I'd rule that discussion is not in order. It's not part of this. It's part of council's work for sure, and I think that needs to come up somewhere else. It needs to be a council decision, really. It's not just patching it up, because there's an ongoing issue over the Te Awa Lake submission, which it's addressing that. That's an existing thing, which something I believe needs to be done about it, and we've suggested here what that is. I think your idea, if that was supported by council at the proper time, would supersede all of this. But in the meantime, which is going to be at least a couple of months before the review comes back, that we've got to have something in place. So I would rule that that's not a legitimate part of this particular discussion. So sorry about that. Yeah, it's not the right time. So have I got a seconder for this, Jeff? So we've got a discussion going, and Councillor Martin was actually first, because he'd booked in, if that's all right. Yep. And then Councillor Jeff.
If I can give the Mayor some input on that, it's always legitimate for him via his own chair's report to, with staff, determine when he would seek the council to initiate an update report and review of the purpose. Is future-proof as a whole fit for purpose? I would assume that would then relate to the Waikato plan, and Waikato means business, and obviously my own views and the Mayor's are probably a little bit different on that, but what I would be suggesting is the Mayor may want to review all those documents. So I'm just saying that can happen sooner than later if he chooses. I'm supporting the recommendation. I think it's a very good one, and one of the things that I want with future-proof is to be updated as to their thinking, particularly with the commuter growth corridor, because we've got the Tainui plans around Merry, for example. So I think I would have some interest in just, you know, the view. The actual growth in the sub-region of Greater Hamilton is really critical, and also that will feed into our own narrative around future boundary adjustments in future, which I still believe this council needs to be hot to trot on, because once, as we know, the Southern Links and the Expressway are completed, we have some very natural boundaries, but we also should be looking at what so-called commuter suburbs of Whatawhata, Te Kowhai, part of Rotorua, what those look like. Also extremely useful to have a once-over of the availability capacity in people, Te Amutu, Cambridge, and some of our so-called commuter towns, and I'm not suggesting for a moment Hamilton stretches out to them as a boundary, but certainly we need to ensure that we have really good planning, because in reality those places like Te Amutu, Morrinsville are increasingly sharing a common community of interest with Hamilton. Thank you.
Thanks. Jeff?
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, look, I very briefly, I totally support these recommendations. I support too that future-proof prioritise a review. There's an awful lot going on, particularly with the draft with the Auckland-Hamilton corridor plan, and so I think that's really badly needed. And I also support 3 and 4 because I felt the submission that Future-Proof made regarding Te Awa initially concerned me a lot because to me it was a classic example of an organisation seeming to operate in isolation. What concerned me greatest about that, I think, was the lack of communication with this council on that, and that's left a bit of an impression on me, I'm afraid. So I certainly support all these recommendations, and sort of be watching Future-Proof's role pretty closely for the next few months.
Thanks. Are there any other speakers? I think Mayor Andrew, thanks.
I just think that Future-Proof is running amok. It's making decisions on behalf of council. It's putting in recommendations without this council having a voice, and asking myself and Dave is sitting on Future-Proof to vote on things after the event, after the reports have been written and after it's been put through, and on things that directly contradict where this council may want to go. And I think we've had a clear example of that recently, and when you start looking back through, they're rolling these reports out on things on our behalf on an ongoing basis. And I just don't think it's actual, I don't think that this was the intention of what Future-Proof was set up for, to run in this way, basically by some external planners, without council having any say till afterwards, and it's basically too late. By then you get NZTA who jumps on board, you get the other organisations that jump on board because they think that that's the direction that we've set, and it becomes very expensive to wind back out of those situations. And so I believe that we need to look at the whole of Future-Proof in the near future, and the way it's set up and the way it runs, and what it's actually there to do. So I'm certainly supportive of where Dave's going here, what he's doing, and but I also think we just need to probably lift it a little bit further too, with a real look at why we're in it and what's it about.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I'd just like to echo, amplify and reverberate what Mayor King has just said. I'm particularly concerned about paragraph 4, that in future, Future-Proof not only not make any submissions to outside bodies relating to growth and development matters concerning Hamilton City Council without first seeking approval for them from Hamilton City Council, which is pretty astonishing to me. So I think that Andrew's absolutely right when he talks about running amok, if that's what's been going on.
Look, I'll just exercise the right of play, even though I didn't speak to start with. I think all the points made are fair comment. Probably running amok is a bit strong, but it did start having a life of its own, Future-Proof. It was no longer a forum for discussion. It was more than a forum for discussion between the partners. It became a body in its own right, and that was never the original intention. And I think if we need to cooperate with our neighbours and with NZTA and TGH and agencies like that, but it should be cooperate in a way that suits us, and if there is anything affecting us, we should have a say in that before decisions are made and official positions taken, and that's what this is referring to, plus the fact that the bits that Blair talked about in relation to paragraph 2 there, relate to the fact that the plan, although only updated last year, is not in sync with many of the things that are happening or foreshadowed to happen in the near future. And we need to make sure it is in sync, and your delegates did raise that issue, and there is a review plan, so this is sort of saying hurry up and do the review and make sure it's flexible enough to handle the quick changing environment we've got. So that's all I'll say there. If there are no other speakers, we just go to the board on this one, thanks, if you don't mind. It's 4 against 2, 3 and 4. That's carried unanimously, thanks. Councillors, while we're on that page, I'll just do the Traffins Conference Resolution number 1 above that, which I'll move, and seconded by Ryan. I could see him so jumping up and down there to second it. If there's no discussion, I'll put that by show of hands. Those in favour or against, it's carried unanimously, thanks. And just referring you to, for your information, to the Regional Transport Plan and Regional Passenger Transport Plan paragraphs in the last part of the report there. That's just for your information. But particularly drawing your attention to the fact that the government's changed its strategy. It's no longer supporting as a top priority 4-lane state highways. Not to say there aren't going to be any, but it's not going to be the priority that it once was. But there's an issue, both the State Highway 1 upgrade down to Pairere and then perhaps on to the top of the Kaimais, plus Southern Links, both are state highways of that nature potentially, and there's a bit of competition in the region as to which should come the highest priority. At the moment, State Highway 1's the priority above Southern Links. I'm suggesting from the City Council's viewpoint, it's important not just for the fact that we want a safe state highway that removes congestion, also for the development of the Peacock's growth cell. It's important that we get that going, and perhaps medium term for the development of the airport as well, that they know where their boundaries are. And you may remember the submission they gave to the LTP, pointing out some of the issues concerned with that. All of those things need to be addressed, and the best addressed by construction starting, I think, of the well, they call it the W2 route part of Southern Links and all of our parts of it. So some of them we're building, some of them NZTA is building, but and the design is on the books to be done starting in 2021 year. So that's 2 years from now. And there's 3 years worth of design and scoping and everything ready to go. But there's nothing yet in the NZTA's budget to start diggers. So that's and us boys want to play with diggers, and there's none on in sight at the moment. So I'm suggesting that that's quite important for us for a number of reasons, and that we should continue to push that up as high as we can. So are there any questions on that part? If not, oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing.
Just a question, just help me on that issue. Do we have a formal position as a council?
Chris, can you help with that? I don't recall whether we've had any formal discussion.
I think it's been a long-standing view of this council that Southern Links is a high priority for us. So in my whole time here, we've promoted at every opportunity in Southern Links to be a high priority. We've started from a position where we haven't had a lot of agreement around that, but we do have substantive agreement around the RTC. I think in the past, this council has supported the completion of the Waikato Expressway ahead of Southern Links, and those are the bits that are being built now, the Hamilton bypass. I'd need to check, but I think this council has previously probably endorsed Cambridge to Pairere as a high priority, but certainly not Pairere across to Tauranga would be my view. I'd need to check that through various submissions, but clearly we've always been pushing Southern Links as a very high priority.
Perhaps, Chris, in the future meeting we could have a small report just on the issue of those two and the relative priorities.
Yeah,
look, I think maybe to get a formal position, because Martin raises a good question there.
Well, I mean, obviously everyone knows that I'm a very keen advocate and it's logical to extend the expressway to Pairere, and I'll be asking those questions, ask relevant questions and future-proofing the corridor to Tauranga Taupo. However, I do accept from the city's point of view, Southern Links is quite crucial, and I think if I'm ever, as Deputy Mayor, as against me as an individual elected councillor, being asked to represent the city or express the city's point of view, it would help if we had a formal position on those.
So perhaps we just record that as a note in the minutes would be great, thanks. Okay, any other questions? If not, I'll just put one more resolution, that the Chair's report be received. That's seconded by Councillor Mark. Any discussion? If not, those in favour, show of hands, against, carried, thanks. Okay, we're on to the General Manager's report, which is, sorry, I'm just looking for the page for that. 15 starts, thanks. Jen is next, I think. Is Jen here? I'm right here. Oh, you're so quiet. Sorry, good morning. Jen, sorry, Jen. I'm looking over there.
I'm here. I know. I even wore bright red, still can't see me.
Thank you, Jen.
No problem. We'll just take questions on the first 2 points, if there are any, on the growth indicator report. First off.
We'll just sort of do them one at a time, work out through the main headings. So are there any questions on that? Gary, thanks.
Unfortunately, I've got tons of questions on the growth indicator report. Just on page 25, you say there were 276 dwellings valued at $70 million in the first 3 months. That works out at only $253,000 per dwelling. That is affordable housing.
So Gary,
can't
can
be
I ask Andy or Stafford to answer that?
Good morning, councillors. So that is the recorded value when the builder lodges their building consent. So while we don't know what their actual true costs are, it's what they record on the form. So it doesn't include land prices, doesn't include profit margins, it probably doesn't include financing costs.
So what is it? It's a totally meaningless figure then, isn't it?
Well,
yes.
It's meaningless in terms of if you take it in isolation, but it's interesting to look over time at the changing values.
But, okay, so why do we bother collecting that figure?
It's required regulatory information.
Okay. So how is it, okay, so when a builder puts in a consent or something, do they make a guess?
Well, they won't know their final costs, but it'll be what their what their QV costs will be. So what they think the project will cost them to build.
Okay. So when do we use this figure? When do we use that figure for anything other than this report?
So we use this figure. We use this figure normally to look at the cost of the building, and especially when it comes to industrial and commercial, that figure becomes more importantly.
But staff just said it doesn't include the land price anyway.
It doesn't include, it's just purely the cost of the project, and that's when they submit their building consent, they put in the estimated cost of the project. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then we collect that figure at that time.
But we hold the land value information separately, don't we? As the land itself would be in the QV system.
Yeah, correct. So the value we collect here in the building consent is just purely the cost of the project. Yeah. It doesn't include any land value, and it doesn't really mean the market value or the sales price.
Sorry, Gary, continue.
Okay, no, that's right. Thanks, Dave. Well, I just query the relevance or the value of that figure at all. It doesn't.
On the building consent application form, there is a question as to the estimated value, which staff are required to ask of a consent applicant.
Okay. But we'd all agree that, well, all I've done is taken your 70 million divided by 276 dwellings and divided them two and came out with $253,000, which is a figure that has no meaning to anyone then, does it? Because it's not the cost of the property. Was that
compared this time this year with this time last year, so you can see trends rather
trends and meaningless figures. Yeah, okay.
I can add something.
Sorry, Andy.
Since from the second half of last year and also this year, we've noticed there's some significant increase in the amount of units, apartments, those infill development. That's why when you calculate the average, that cost is lower than the 2 years ago where you have lots of greenfield development like standalone house. That cost will be higher.
I've got no no confidence at all in what that figure tells anyone anything. Okay. All right, so on page 27, this is just a bit of education for me. A CCC versus a 224C, a code compliance certificate is different to a 224C?
So they're like different sides of the equation. The 224C is the titling of a section.
And sorry, just stop there. That's when development levies have to be paid, is that right?
That is one of the triggers for development levies. Generally the most commonly used for housing development.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And what's a CCC?
It's a code compliance certification.
So that means it's allowed to be sold, or that means it's a safe house and all those sort of things, it's not leaky and all those sort of things. And does that, so you're allowed to sell it, well, most people wouldn't buy a house that didn't have a CCCs, correct? Yeah, okay, but you could, there's no reason why you can't.
Correct.
Okay. All right. But the 224C just is the trigger to say that your house is now, this property is now creating demand on city services, hence you need to pay for your share of those city services.
It is one of the regulatory triggers for collecting development contributions.
But is it not the only trigger?
No, we can also collect on service connection and and on CCC. So of those three connection points, 224 generally comes first in a residential development.
Okay. All right. Because some of the issues we have with trying to estimate our development contributions is people put in consents to build, and is that when you start to make a guess of what the development contributions will be?
We don't do that.
Oh, that's another department, is it? Okay. Thank you. Just on page 31, population and household projections, says that we've got in the headline, in the subhead there, the council uses Nydia Low projections for population and households over the next 10 years. Nydia Low projects Hamilton will grow by approximately 2,100 people and 1,250 households every year. You divide those two and you get 1.7 people per household. Is there something wrong with my analysis there? That just strikes me as a particularly lonely house. I mean, I just trying to, is it right? Is it correct?
2.7 people per dwelling is the national average.
Okay, so is there something wrong in my calculation that I've done there? Is there something wrong in the logic of what I've just said?
Sorry, what also happens is as households become smaller, so people, your children leave your household.
Understand that.
So the household growth rates don't
These
necessarily...
are new houses, aren't they?
They're new households, so like a group of people who identify as a household. They change at a different rate than the number of people coming into the city. So, for instance, if population, hypothetically, were to stay completely still, we would expect households to rise as household units become smaller. Potentially a couple, as they age, one of them may die, so then the household becomes smaller, or children leave the house.
But this is all for growth. This is what you're saying, or whoever prepared this report says that approximately 2,100 people are going to come into the city, and those 2,100 people will be consumed within 1,250 households.
So it's two types of growth in the city. One is the population growth and one is the household growth. So household growth can originate from within the city. It's not necessarily of the 2,100 people are not forming the 1,250 households.
But over time, the two, they must equate?
they're separate as like, you know, the population. If it stayed still, the households would grow. So that kind of shows how, from our internal.
Okay, I guess I'm just trying to figure out what that tells us, and it's another stat that doesn't seem to make any sense. That's all. I mean, we use this as a little bit of an information for ourselves to make decisions. Developers and the public can use this to make decisions. I'm just wondering how that would help us, because it just seemed to me that it's a particularly low number of people per household.
So I think the high level thing to take away is that the council uses household information primarily for decision making.
Right.
So the people have been provided also what the population growth is expected to be, because it's a more tangible, real number that you can grapple.
Okay.
But this 1,250 households is very important for how we plan the city, like where do we need pipes, where do we need infrastructure, what actual demands are being placed. Other services generally might align better to population, such as
Are you pretty confident these figures are right?
Yeah, those are correct. Those are the projections.
Okay. On page 32, there's a little graph, little grid there. Medium sale price pre-2010, post-2010. The total figures for a house is $572,500. That's a total of what?
So that is when you take the entire housing stock sold within that year. That was the median sales price.
Which year is it, Steph?
This was the 2017 calendar year.
Okay.
So it's the average of the two columns preceding it, is it?
Oh, sorry, can I just clarify? That was the year to August 2017.
Yeah, okay. So
Sorry,
are you saying that the average...
Gary, just hang, is the total figure the average of all households at August 2017?
Yeah, correct, the median, yeah.
Thanks.
So it says the next column before that, post-2010, does that tell us that since 2010, the average value of a house sold was $727,000?
No, sorry. This is trying to differentiate between newly built houses and houses that are like existing older stock. So to get a good sample size, we said everything that has been built since 2010 is similar to a new dwelling. We've said that, you know, if you buy a house that's 5 years old, it's pretty similar to a new built house compared to, say, an old weatherboard house. So those houses that have been built since 2010 and sold have a median sales price of $727,000. So it's just indicating that something that you would probably all know, that a new house will sell for more than an old house.
Yep.
But the total is much lower than that figure because the volume of sales in Hamilton from the data we collected was primarily of the pre-2010 built houses.
So does that mean that you could, it's relatively easy to buy a house at $572,000? Well, relatively easy is wrong, but is it, there are quite a few, the average house sold is...
Most, half of all house sales are below that figure.
Okay. All right, thank you. Just page 36. So under key findings, 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth bullet point, talked about the majority of spend in the CBD is on food and liquor, which accounts for about 43% of the total. So does that just sort of confirm that the CBD is becoming less of a retail environment and more of a restaurant, bar, whatever you call it? Hospitality is probably the right word. Hospitality precinct?
That breakdown of a larger percentage of food, liquor and entertainment has always been present in the CBD. It's just indicating what is a current trend.
Yeah, Steph, what I'm trying to do is we use this is something that we use for information and which we can form decisions about. So I wanted to make sure I understand what's happening down there. So, what? Go on.
So for the food and liquor food and liquor retail spend in CBD. So I'll just give you a figure, Councillor. So for the first quarter of 2008, it's about 43%.
First quarter of what?
Of 2018,
2018.
it's about 43% retail spend is on food and liquor in CBD. And then just give you an idea. So if we
nearly
look
half of every dollar that's spent in the CBD is on food and booze. Yep.
Correct. And then just give you also figures for you to compare. So if we look at 2010 for the whole year figure, the retail spend on food and liquor is about 41%. So in saying that, so it's about from 41 to 43%, about 2% increase for the last 8 years, and it's pretty steady.
Yep. Okay. So half of what, just about half of what's spent in town is food and grog. So it's not, and the other half would be
those
jeans and things that you buy in
correct,
clothing shops and whatnot.
Furniture, hospitality, and other retail. And
does that include money spent with lawyers and accountants and things in town?
Yes, if they do have an Apple's machine, and because the data is collected from the Paymark, which is
but an accountant, if you're an accountant, you generally don't pay your accountant by. I don't know how you pay your accountant, but you generally don't pay it by FPOS or anything. Would that, so do these figures, because there's an awful lot of not retail, an awful lot of stuff in here that's not retail, that is business, which is accountants, planners, lawyers, all that sort of stuff. Is that get captured in these figures?
No, so this is only the
it is only
retail spend.
However,
card. For example, if it's a dental clinic or anything, when people finish and pay by the card, that will be included here. Yeah.
So it doesn't capture any of that. It captures hardly any of what you could call commercial activity.
So that would be covered by the GDP for the central city.
Okay.
Where are you going, Gary?
Just page 40, district plan zones explained. The first paragraph, the end of it, talked about, we talked about the base and whatnot. At the end of that first paragraph, you said these, so we're now talking about centres proposed around planned residential expansion, Rotokauri, Rototurna, Peacock, etc. These centres provide a more limited range of everyday goods and services for the immediate residential neighbourhoods. What are the implications of that? So, I mean, presumably this is more competition for the CBD.
I think they're just local, smaller shopping centres.
Yep,
so
understand. But again, staff, I'm trying to figure out what's the point of doing these reports if we don't use them for something or it informs our decision making. So we can take from this that these centres out that aren't in the CBD, they're based, but more, but a little bit like the Chartwell, 1.1, Chartwell 1.2, 1.3 out there. These will start taking away business from the CBD because people won't be coming into town, or it might be just new business. But so what are we supposed to take from this?
I think that's more of a planning related question, but it gives you an indication of where the dollars are being spent in the city. And I mean, obviously all business is competition for other business. So yes, these centres are competition for the CBD.
Okay.
You're right there.
If you had looked the previous quarterly report, where we were looking at the entire Hamilton retail spend.
What?
The previous quarterly report covered the entire Hamilton. For this quarter,
covered the entire Hamilton. Yep.
Yeah, for this quarter, we just want to focus on CBD because we get some feedback from the public saying we want to have a look what exactly happening on CBD. That's why for this issue, we just purely focus on CBD. And previous issue, you can find the distribution for the entire Hamilton, that where there's the percentage of CBD and all other centres.
Okay.
They were asked questions about that last time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gary. Councillor Angela.
Oh,
You did, Mark. I don't know what happened. We'll put Mark and then Angela.
Yeah, no, actually, thank you for doing that, because my question is around exactly where we were going with that. Thanks, Angela. Regards the figures around the other areas, so they were in the previous report, is that right? The base, because we've only got the CBD retail here, bearing in mind that we represent the base chart wall.
So we do these every quarter, and we try and not just produce the exact same set of data. So every edition there'll be new pieces of information, slightly different format, but generally every few editions we'll cycle back round and refresh data sets.
So could you help, because what would be useful for me to make these decisions would be to see consistent sets of data so I can monitor trends. So I'd like to be able to see the base v Chartwell v the CBD for some of these decisions we're making. Is it possible to include those in pretty much most reports without putting you guys to an enormous amount of effort? Because what's useful to us is, okay, it's nice that the central city retail spend's going up, but how's it going compared to the other regions? Are we putting too much effort over here versus here versus
Councillor
here?
Mark, I've just been thinking, along with Gary's questions as well, that perhaps we need, at one of the briefing sessions after the LTP's over, need to have this data there and have a discussion about what we would most like, as regular reports, and perhaps some highlighting by staff, what sort of, some not just the raw stats here, but what we should take for some of the questions Gary was asking. And so then it's a bit hard in a formal meeting to sort of go through that sort of discussion, but in a briefing we could. So you just sort of preempted. I was going to raise that with Jen at the break. So I think if we do that, we can get a better handle, staff can get a better handle on what we want, what we will find most useful.
Great. You guys happy with that?
If I can make that
Yeah, sure. But just one thing to just let you know, because the data is based on a district plan zone. So in a district plan, Chartwell and the base, they are grouped as sub-regional centre. So at the moment, we are unable to compare Chartwell against the base. However, we can compare the base and Chartwell against CBD. That's based on district plan zone.
And I appreciate it. We're starting to verge on commercial sensitivity there too, but it would be useful to know. So if we follow that briefing example, that would be helpful. Thanks, guys.
So we'll see you back in a briefing session in some detail. Angela, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Good suggestion. I fully support that. Just a couple of my questions around, and this will be picked up in the briefing actually. This report, the figures in this report are on report quarterly on a calendar year and not the financial year. Is that correct?
Sorry, depending on the information data set we have available, it can change between the two. I appreciate that it can be difficult to follow. We try to make it clear. But just due to trying to use the most up-to-date information or to display the best trend information available, we do switch between the two. So
that does make it quite difficult to monitor, because getting data like this is really, really important. So that'll be something that we'll pick up in the briefing. And I'm just on page 24. Just a concern, I guess, I'm raising. The key findings there, where the report says that Hamilton has experienced its strongest residential housing boom since the financial crisis in 2008. I just happened to be looking at the 2014-15 annual report last night. Don't ask me why, I can't remember. And again, this is a calendar year, the data here, but you're saying 276 new dwellings were approved through 178 consents. So you're saying that this is the strongest quarter we've seen since 2008. But when I looked at that report last night, that was if I take 178 consents times that by 4, that's around 700 consents a year. And yet 2014-15 year was 900 consents. I guess I'm flagging my concern when we start using words like strongest housing boom ever in reports, because this is public documentation. It might again be something that we raise.
I think each consent can cover more than one housing unit.
Yeah, and I appreciate the variances in terms of this is just number of consents, and the annual report from 14-15 didn't have dwellings, but consents were considerably higher if I extrapolate this out for a 12-month period. So I do worry about words like that, because we tend to grab these messages and then run with them.
So can I clarify on what the intent of the wording there was? So the housing boom that we're discussing in the key finding, being the strongest since the financial crisis, is a more broad arching look at where the current growth environment is. Over the past 3 years, we've had record high sustained growth in building numbers. So while looking at one quarter in isolation, it might not be the biggest quarter we've seen, but the sort of first statement was a broad overarching, here's where we are, this is the current consenting environment, it is a consenting environment of strong growth. So sorry if it's not clear that the...
It's a caution, and I'll raise it at that briefing using language like that. I mean, these are supposed to be factual, statistical data that we can help inform our decision making and know whether we're on the right track. So that's really important to me, that we kind of peel back that kind of emotive language.
Can I please add 2 points?
So, Andy?
Thank you. So the other 2 points I want to add is because that's only January to March data, normally you would experiencing a slowdown in January because the holiday period. So that's just 1 quarter of the data that doesn't really illustrate the full year. And then the other point is, because since there's been lots of infill development happening, like apartments and all that, so at the moment one consent could have more than 1 dwelling. Saying you put a duplex, there'll be 4 dwellings. Where when we had a big greenfield development, like normally one consent only has 1 dwelling, which is a detached house. So these are the housing type mix change that we've been seeing in the last 6 to 10 months.
I think we'll try and get our heads around that all a bit more in the briefing session, but so that you guys have a chance to put more context around some of these figures, and that we can say what's most useful to us. So I think we need to move on to the next item. I haven't got any more. Sorry, Angela, did you finish?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So thanks very much for that. So we're on to the local alcohol policy update. Jen, who's doing that? Oh, Ricky, g'day. That's on page 16, councillors, up the top. Thanks, Ricky. Do you want to introduce that?
Yeah, so just a quick update in response to the request from the Chair at a previous meeting, just to give more or less an update on what happened in Auckland's situation, and I took the opportunity to bring the elected members up to speed on a few other things as well. It made sense. The only thing I would like to add to that, assuming that we accept that it's been read, that I was at the hearing yesterday in Auckland talking to our submission to central government on their bill, and in all things considered, our submission was well received.
Yeah, I've seen a bit of media coverage generally about the issue. We're not the only council saying the same sort of thing. Yep. Gary, thanks.
On paragraph 7 on page 16, last sentence is that a report will be prepared by the governance unit prior to the AGM and outline all LGN remits. When will that report be here?
That'll be a question probably for the governance manager.
The LGNZ remits will come to you as soon as we receive them from LGNZ. We're anticipating at this point that it will come to the extraordinary meeting of the 26th of June, if not.
Will that come to a council meeting, will it?
So so we didn't submit any remits, just to be clear, as the council in the end.
We just were asked for our opinions on other people's.
And they come back as a set. The set that LGNZ agree on come back to each council to be put in front of their councils for endorsement or approval or otherwise. So when we receive that documentation, which we're expecting very shortly, it will come to the next available council meeting, either be extraordinary on the 26th of June or on the 28th of June.
Okay, and one of those remits will include the what's called here the Napier one. which,
we're assuming
Ask
that
for
that's
local.
what will...
Yep, no, I've confirmed that Zone 3 have approved that, and that has been submitted to, for the AGM.
thank you.
Thanks very much. If there are no other questions on that, thanks, Ricky. We'll move on to Blair, the Auckland-Hamilton Corridor Plan. Is that Blair? Here he is, just in time. The corridor plan. Oh, he's just grabbing his notes, agenda. Thanks, Blair.
Thank you, councillors. So, councillors, the corridor plan is an initiative of Ministers Twyford, Ministers Mahuta and Minister Julianne Genter, and it's effectively the government's new blueprint for integrated planning between the government, between local government and key stakeholders, including iwi and high growth areas. In this case, it's looking at the corridor between to the southern part of Auckland and the isthmus of Hamilton. So it's an opportunity for us to work with those other parties to really look at how we can accelerate or bring new initiatives to the table to help us manage the growth and the opportunities that growth is presenting. And as you will see in the report, I've talked about some of the things that have been contemplated, such as special purpose vehicles, urban development authorities. Obviously, we have the Housing Infrastructure Fund. Obviously, there is discussions and the business case for the startup rail, but there are other potential initiatives as well that the government are looking to introduce. And I guess it's a way for us to work with the government and with the iwi to I guess, realise some of those opportunities quicker than they otherwise may not have happened. And so this is the new government sort of blueprint for best practice planning in high growth areas. And so we have a meeting coming up in Wellington again on the 25th of June. We had an earlier meeting in February, and the meeting in June is really to discuss progress and alignment between all those entities with the government ministers. And so we're going to be represented at that meeting by Chair Dave, Mayor Andrew, Richard Briggs and myself, and there'll be representatives from all the other stakeholders at that meeting. The intention is that the corridor plan by about September this year will have a series of initiatives to be pursued, and they will be initiatives in the short, medium and long term, and they will be where working with the government and those other stakeholders we can accelerate our response to growth. So happy through the chair to take any questions on that.
I think I'll go to Angela first, if you don't mind, Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Blair, are we required, I know it's early days yet, but is there an expectation that there'll be funding for this plan from us?
It's too early to say. I mean, I think, Angela, in terms of the development of the plan, we're really doing that off the back of existing initiatives and the likes of the work that we've done through our future-proof partnership, the work that we've done in terms of Hamilton, the work that we're doing on the rail startup business case. So any cost to being involved is really time myself and other staff. Into the future, it's more likely that if there's any money required, it'll be on specific initiatives which are actually targeted at growth, such as if we were to pursue an urban development authority in a particular growth area, there may be some cost for council, but that would be the cost of normal business of doing growth. So I'm seeing that the development of the plan is a relatively light touch. It's more a case of aligning initiatives and getting going on those. And
in terms of all aspects of growth, so it's all infrastructure, transportation, housing initiative, all the whole package
That's right.
for
That's
growth.
correct. That's correct.
Growth. Okay.
And industry as well, you know, commercial and factories and so forth.
I think if I just quickly expand on that, Angela, what the ministers recognise that Auckland is obviously growing at an extremely fast rate. Auckland has its own challenges with how it copes with the growth. The government have invested with NZTA through the expressway right through to Cambridge. Hamilton and I guess the area around Hamilton has a strong proposition in terms of what we can offer in terms of working with Auckland, working with the government. How can we best utilise all those existing infrastructure investments and our planned infrastructure and our planned growth to get the best outcomes for the upper part of the North Island? And so, for example, it may be better for New Zealand for some of that growth to be accommodated somewhere between Auckland and Hamilton, as opposed to necessarily just all going to Auckland. It may be, for example, that we can utilise Hamilton Airport to a greater extent in terms of the context of upper North Island air travel. And so how do we find those opportunities, explore those opportunities, and then bring them together with the government and other partners to make them happen?
Is this the UNESA partners?
No, this is purely our council, Waikato District Council, Regional Council, Auckland Council, Watercare, Auckland Transport, and then all the government agencies.
Thanks.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. The picture that this paints in my mind is you talk about a corridor, so presumably it's primarily development down State Highway 1 from Auckland to us, or the Waikato, the wider Waikato.
You think of it like an hourglass. I guess you've got a bubble in the Auckland and a bubble around Hamilton and then a narrow corridor up the middle. Where you do have little bits, say for example Huntly, there's opportunities in Huntly where potentially Huntly could be with greater investment.
There's opportunities up the whole shaft, isn't there?
And I think the difference, you're absolutely correct, Gary. I mean, we're not talking big distances either side of the expressway for a number of reasons. One is the land for some of those areas is not great land for development. But where there are motorway interchanges in existing communities, there's opportunities to grow and develop those. But most of the bigger development will be in the southern part of Auckland and around Hamilton. And so that ties back to the earlier chair's recommendations, this is all part of that same wider conversation. The government are looking at us. They are clearly seeing that there's significant growth occurring in Auckland and Hamilton and of course across the Tauranga. How can we work with you to get the best outcome for New Zealand Inc. and with the initiatives that the government are considering through the urban growth agenda, work with you councils and work with the key stakeholders and work with iwi to deliver those in a really fast and efficient way.
And what will our voice be? Are we going to be channelled through Future Proof in this, or are we? Because you mentioned the Future Proof partners are blah blah blah.
No, we have our own voice.
So we're going there as an independent entity, wanting to see the best for everyone, but speaking primarily on behalf of our constituents.
We're speaking with a very strong voice for Hamilton.
Strong voice.
But I think when I say Hamilton, we're also speaking very strongly with the greater Hamilton area. So Gary, it's fair to say that I'm making sure that this process has been controlled by the key local government partners and not some of the government agencies, so that we are keeping the government agencies very honest. That this is we've already got good plans. We're looking to build on those. We don't want this to become an exercise in central government bureaucracy. We're looking for outcomes. We're looking for pace. We're looking for things that we can achieve.
Okay. And you use the analogy of the Isthmus of Hamilton. What do you mean by that?
So I'm talking about, Hamilton's boundary is relatively small. Yep. So when we think of growth in Hamilton, we do think about Southern Links and we think about the communities surrounding the city. Yeah. And so that, to me, when I'm talking about the Hamilton end of the equation, it's all that area, sort of Cambridge, Hamilton, Airport, up to Taupiri, Ngaruawahia,
These are Martin's freeloaders.
Correct, but but that community is the longer term future of Hamilton. Yeah. So we need to think about it now. I mean, although we can look at Hamilton and say we have land within the city boundary that can be built on, that's correct. But actually, in the context of long-term planning, we actually don't have that much land. And so we need to think now in our conversations with the government around that longer-term macro picture. So
holding that, or potential barriers to that, is we have set in reasonably rigid structures, a district plan, what's the Waikato Regional Council
policy statement?
Yeah, regional policy statement, those sort of things, and we have agreements with on water.
Yes.
Those sorts of things. So those are things that...
So those things are all on the table for discussion as part of this. So, for example, the government are proposing an urban development authority. Yeah. The intention of that, that's an overseas model, is to fast-track through some of those planning processes you talked about. The ability to
get around the rigidities in the district plan.
Correct. Yeah. So amalgamate land, potentially work across boundaries, push through regional policy statements, district plans to achieve faster planning outcomes to enable land to be developed.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillors, rather than starting a new one, I suggest we break now. We're going to start sharp at 11. with item 7, and then after that we'll go back and complete the second half of the GM's report. Okay, thanks. item 7, councillors, the NZTA NZTA update. We've got Parakawhia here, welcome, and Anarata and Alistair, thanks. Parakawhia, the time's yours. We've got a presentation here with some very good pictures. I quite liked them when I looked at them last night. I'm going to use some of them, I told them.
Well, morena tatou, good morning everybody, and thank you through the chair for the invitation to the agency. We're always pleased to come before you all to this particular committee to provide an update and also make ourselves available to answer any questions that you may have of us. As mentioned, alongside me today is Anarata, who's our principal transport planner, one of them across the agency, and Alistair Talbot, one of 4 lead strategic advisors. He holds a national position across the agency. So when it comes to any matters of detail around questions, then obviously both my colleagues, well, between the 3 of us, will respond to you. Clearly there's been a lot that's gone on and is going on in the land transport space, given our government. And so I'm going to share some of the I guess the key priorities and what is keeping us very much focused at the moment. The particular image here is actually of the Waikato Tainui and Archaeology team, and very recently, I think it was last month, there was a discovery along the Hamilton section of the Waikato Expressway of bones, koiwi. And so that image there is a shot of that, what is happening, because that's had a little bit of media coverage, both nationally and in the papers as well. So let me start off with obviously the development of the National Land Transport Program, which will be endorsed by our board by the end of August. So let me work back from that. The National Land Transport Program obviously comes from the National Land Transport Fund. It is developed every 3 years, and we're right in that cycle now of the National Land Transport Program for the next period, 2018 to 2021. A couple of weeks ago now, no, it's probably almost 6 weeks ago, the government released its draft government policy statement on land transport, and that identified 4 significant priority areas around safety, access, improved environmental outcomes and value for money. Around about the same time, we, the agency, released our draft investment assessment framework, and that is essentially the tool that we use to assess, or the criteria we use to assess various programs and projects. The final GPS, or government policy statement, will be adopted before or on or before the 30th of June. The investment assessment framework, which is led out by the Transport Agency, will be adapted and will give effect to the final GPS. Currently, we're continuing to process bids for improvement work programs. And therefore, I want to make the point that and we're working with your teams, with your staff and people around business cases and assessments to make sure that they align. The Waikato Regional Land Transport Plan, Councillor McPherson and I sat on the deliberations of the hearings that we've recently had last Friday, and that's been tweaked, I should say, the draft Regional Land Transport Plan, but it will go back up to the Waikato Regional Transport Committee shortly for endorsement, or for consideration and endorsement. So those are just some of the highlights around the draft government policy statement and what's happening around developing the National Land Transport Program. I probably should also add that the government will have already signalled there will be a second government policy statement in 2019, and that is ready to give effect to their priority around road safety, rail, any other measures that come out of the establishment of the Climate Change Commission and so on. So this is the first stage, here is the second stage. What is also key for the agency is what we call the Transport Agency Investment Proposal. Some of your staff who've been working with the agency over a number of years would be familiar with what we had previously, which was the State Highways Investment Proposal. Obviously, this government has a much broader, taken a much broader view of the transport system to be inclusive of things like rail, obviously, walking, cycling, mode neutrality and so on. So our Transport Agency Investment Proposal, which went live in April and is available for review and so on, it indicates what projects are likely to proceed based on our investment assessment framework and criteria. I do want to mention that for the Waikato, there are probably about 4 projects that are currently, that will be re-evaluated. Those are the sort of projects like State Highway 2, Pōkeno to Mangatarata, a number involving State Highway 29, so Te Poi over to the Kaimai Summit and so on. But I am pleased, given that we are here at Hamilton City today, that Southern Links is in the tape, or in the Transport Agency Investment Proposal. So I wanted to flag that because I know that certainly Mayor King and your chair here have been very strong advocates of Southern Links. Other matters that I wanted to highlight with you is really the alignment with Access Hamilton. So we're working very closely with your team and with councillors as well. So it includes the key priority of short-term activities, so cycling, active road user, completion of State Highway 1, Cobham Drive, Cambridge Road improvements, and State Highway 1, Cambridge Road, the Waikato Expressway, State Highway 1, 26 Hillcrest roundabout. I understand this morning, I've just briefly had a quick chat to Blair. There has been an update provided on the, well, depending on where you sit, Hamilton to Auckland corridor plan. If you're in Auckland, obviously they say it the other way around, Auckland to Hamilton. But this is an initiative that's is being led out by our Minister, Minister Twyford, also involving Minister Mahuta and our Associate Minister of Transport, Genta. I think Minister Twyford, you will know, not only holds the transport portfolio, but he is also housing and urban development. And so he is taking a very holistic approach to this corridor initiative and spatial plan that will unlock opportunities not just in the transport space but also in housing, environmental, economic opportunities. It is a plan that is a partnership, involves a partnership between involving local government, central government and iwi. Waikato Tainui is at the table. However, if you look at the corridor itself, there are other iwi in the Tamaki Auckland space. We are engaging with those iwi to determine which of those will also be around the table. So it's not just Waikato Tainui. This plan will build on existing documents, including obviously future-proof, the Auckland plan, and of course your district plan. There's a lot of work involved in this piece of work, so we're looking to have a draft spatial plan ready by around June, July 2018, and a final spatial plan and corridor management plan ready by September 2018. I also want to acknowledge too the involvement that our local MP, Jamie Strange has had as well in that project. Another critical project is the Auckland to Hamilton passenger rail service. Yesterday I sat in on the deliberations at the Waikato Regional Council and heard the discussion that went on around the passenger rail service, so they resolved to include it in their 10-year plan. And they will say, in terms of resolutions of obviously of particular interest, that may be of interest to you, but certainly of interest to the agency, given that the passenger rail service will be funded through the National Land Transport Fund. They approved it subject to the agency approving funding at a financial assistance rate of no less than 75% for operational expenditure and 100% for capital expenditure. So it is very clear what the commitment from central government, what's required to be able to deliver on the passenger rail service. I'd like to acknowledge the involvement of your staff and obviously elected members in the passenger rail service and your advocacy. Again, we've got a lot of work to do, but we certainly from the agency's perspective looking to have the business case to our board by September, and that doesn't give us a lot of time, but we have to make this, you know, we're committed to enabling this to happen. Access Hamilton, again, we've been working very closely with your team and working towards the agency or our board approval, so ensuring that there's good alignment with the government's priorities, as I've mentioned previously. It's involved ourselves, your Hamilton City plus the Regional Council, but we will certainly come back to the Access Hamilton Task Force before anything is delivered to our board. That's absolutely critical that whatever goes up to our board has the full endorsement and support of the Access Hamilton Task Force. However, meanwhile, there are 4 particular projects that we are committed to accelerating and working alongside with you. I've already mentioned the Gordon Road, Thomas Road intersection, Peach Grove, Hukanui school links, the mass transit plan, and State Highway, again, Cambridge Road improvements. We're more than happy, and we will brief councillors to allow early input into the scope of those projects. And two more slides. The update on the Waikato Expressway, the Hamilton section. So we certainly are on track for a 2020 opening. I won't say whether it will be at the beginning or at the end of the year, because that, like any of the projects of this scale, it's all weather dependent, and we didn't have a particularly good year last year. It was a lot of rain. However, we have opened 4 overbridges have opened recently. We've got the Resolution Drive connection, works are underway there, and the design has been worked through with your reps. I just want to mention quickly the Horsham Downs link. We are working with the Waikato District Council on a business case, ready to get that back on track, get it sorted so that we can commence or start the build. Those physical works were suspended in 2016, and Anna Rada and I had a discussion about that this morning, so there were some reasons for why that happened. We're more than happy to go through those a little bit later in the question session, but I think the key thing is we're working with the District Council to get it back on track. And finally, probably 2 or 3 months ago, we sent out this particular document which set out our role, the role and responsibilities of the agency, particularly as we're embedding our own transformation through the agency, which is going to take a little while. But also there was a link attached to this document which said who to keep in contact with. I know that this has caused some frustration. We've had feedback from some of our other local council partners about that it wasn't particularly helpful at times, but I think I do want to reassure you that we are committed to working with Hamilton City, and that obviously I'm a key conduit for yourselves as elected members, and we have staff the likes of Anna Rada and Alistair who are dealing with people in your team. But not only Anna Rada and Alistair, we've got a number of others based in Wellington and across the region as well. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm more than happy to take questions and have the conversation with you. So, thank you.
Thanks very much, Patakawhia. Look, we've got Gary questions first up. Sorry, Councillor, just remind everyone, this is questions, not debate. We're just receiving this for information. You can tease out the questions a bit, but please don't get into debate. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Patakawhia, for Now, just you talked about your 4 key goals, I think safety, access, environment, value for money. How do you calculate value for money? And I'm kind of thinking in terms of human kilometres travelled divided by price. Yep, go ahead. Whoever
I'll
wants
ask Alistair to respond to that question.
You try and speak into the mic if you can. Thanks, Alistair. It doesn't move very far. Sorry.
I shall move then. Yeah, so value for money isn't a new term in terms of one of our criteria. It's existed for a period of time and it has been a focus of government generally. But I guess we define it in terms of doing the right thing at the right time for the right cost, but we're informed very strongly by the benefit
But that
cost.
doesn't mean anything.
Yep, but we're informed by the benefit cost ratio in terms of understanding how that value is then assessed.
You what?
The benefit cost ratio? Oh, sorry, in terms of input costs for a particular
So they're the cost of doing the project?
Yeah, for the benefits.
That's capital and
Yes,
maintenance
correct.
and da-da-da?
Yeah, and the benefits out of...
And so what are the things that you put into your benefits?
So typically and traditionally we've focused on transport user benefits, safety, vehicle operating costs and travel time. Now there's a signal across...
Do you take into account the number of people travelling on the mode?
Yes.
Okay, which one is those?
Typically the car users.
Well, anyone,
the number of
skateboards,
no.
Bikes?
What we can do though, so in terms of the standardised formulas, it's typically the vehicle users, but we can take into account other benefits, other inputs into that calculation. And those things can be recognised. While there is a sort of a standardised formula, it isn't fixed in terms of other things that we're able to consider. And there's the signal in the GPS and we're responding to that too in terms of the government's intention for us to take a wider perspective to benefits from transport activities in the future. And there's a piece of work that's focused on looking at how we do take a wider benefit perspective to our assessments.
So give us some examples of the other benefits you'd start factoring in.
Yeah, well, I guess some of those wider benefits might just be from land use change, value uplift. Typically when a transport investment goes in, you see development follow that. And there can be
okay, so people's properties go up in value or down in value?
Or it might just enable development generally that then enables job creation.
Yep. Okay, thank you. So it's beyond just the narrow getting people or goods from one place to another place? Safely and on time?
Yeah,
and all
that's the intent of the policy directional change that's being signalled to us.
Thank you. And Parikawhia, have you seen our report on, you spoke about passenger rail.
Yes.
There was I'm not sure if you guys were involved in the little survey that was done, but I think the survey showed that we get about 280 people per working day, I assume it is. I'm not
yes,
sure.
That's what it is.
200 per working day, thank you. Would use the passenger the passenger rail to Auckland. So at max, that would take 280 cars off the road, but that would not be the case because some people would be going and not everyone's going to be one person per car. Does that sort of fall into a benefit? Is that a benefit? Is there a sufficient value in that to make it worthwhile? And this might be outside your terms of reference, I'm not sure.
Yes, I have seen that, the analysis and the survey work that was done. So certainly that's a factor, it's an input, but it's not the only issue matter that we would take into consideration in terms of patronage.
Do you have any idea how many people go up every day to Auckland and back? Does anyone know?
Yeah, there is some information on that that's starting to inform the business case. I don't have those figures to hand though.
Do you think 280 would be half the number of people going up?
I couldn't speak
per day.
I'd prefer to go back to
might be 0.001% of the people going up, eh?
couldn't speculate.
Gary,
No,
they've said-
okay, so
they've said they don't
that
have-
information, can you, you'll, obviously that'll be public information, I dare say, that can be shared, or who's doing that?
So there is census information in terms of journey to work type surveys that we each complete as part of the census. That is some of the information we rely on. And
But there must be, someone must be counting the cars that go up that major, that would probably be the busiest.
Gary,
Yeah, so I'm asking.
Gary, when I'm talking, just wait a sec. You're now covering territory that is in the later report, and Chris is certainly going to cover off that issue that you're raising, but they've said they don't have those figures. The NZTA reps have said.
Do you not have those figures?
not to hand, but we will have traffic counts.
You will
that
have
show-
those figures,
yeah,
but you don't have them now.
There's traffic counts on
Okay.
all state highways.
Could you forward those to us, or someone?
We can provide access to that information.
Good to know how many cars.
Gary,
go.
we go, as I said, we go.
David, in
Gary,
Parakafia's,
sorry, when I'm talking,
in her report,
Gary,
she
when
actually mentioned this.
Gary, in standing orders, when the chair's talking, just listen up a bit. See,
That's what you always do, eh?
We're going to cover them in the rail report. Chris is all prepared for that. He has some, at least, of the figures. Anything else that's not supplied then, we'll be more than happy between our staff and NZTA to get it to you. They've already said that, but a lot of what you want to cover off will be covered by Chris in the later report. So you're trying to get stuff out of them that's already going to come up in this meeting, but not right at this point.
Okay, that was one of the projects that was mentioned in Parakafia's
correct.
report. Yeah.
Yep.
So it is within scope, my question.
It's within scope, but they've already said they don't have the figures, and you're trying to ask different ways for the same information.
Okay. That's okay. No, there's the other bits, our submission to that report. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mark.
Thank you. Thank you for your report, Parakafia and team. My question's around the change of emphasis from the Pairere to kaimais, etc. And it's going to sound like wide of the mark, but it's relevant to us. The tauranga to through Katikati, etc. Is there going to be work on that? Because what I'm trying to see is a signal that basically trucks are going to go rather than through Hamilton to Auckland, up that way. And that's has quite a bearing on us. So is that a general emphasis that we're trying to get transport going up the coastal road rather than through the Golden Triangle?
I'll start off on this, and Alistair may want to add to it, because both Alistair and I are involved in the Bay of Plenty Regional Transport Committee. So your question around essentially the State Highway 2, Tauranga to Omokoro and then on to Katikati. Yeah. So that is a project within our Transport Agency investment proposal that is going to be re-evaluated. In saying that, however, the Bay of Plenty Regional Transport Committee have prioritised that as the number one.
Right.
Several of those projects right up 1, 2 and 3. Yeah. And when I say re-evaluated, it's looking at the scope again of those projects to see how they align with the government's policy statement now. Right. So I can't say I'm not going to speculate as to how they will be implemented, what the phasing will be, just to say that they will be re-evaluated again. And likewise, the Cambridge to Perere long-term improvements. The short-term improvements are in our investment proposal. Yeah, those will go ahead. The long-term improvements are going to be re-evaluated as well.
I think that part of Mark's question, though, Parakafia, was related to what the primary route from for freight from between Tauranga and Auckland really is. That Upstate Highway 2 up through the area you're talking about, or is it over the kaimais? At least it's related to Mark's.
That's exactly that.
Okay, sorry.
So I guess for some time that route has been signalled towards the State Highway 129 route, but and part of the reason for that is the Waikato Expressway investment and the outcomes as part of that project, but there is considerable industry on both the other two legs, the State Highway 27 corridor and also the State Highway 2 corridor, which connects through to the Coromandel. So those other corridors will still have freight movement on them.
But what's the principal corridor, or is there no principal corridor?
Well, I guess the investment strategy has been to support the Waikato Expressway and see if we can coordinate a level of freight volume on that, noting that those others will still have demand.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Martin.
Just 3 or 4 concise questions. Road safety first, and the question relates to speed limits design, and with the extra money, the budget, you know, in terms of the recalibration of the land transport strategy, what extra work are we expecting to see in the Waikato, particularly around road design issues and speed limit?
I'll have a go.
Just press your button on there, thanks, Anna.
So really, in terms of probably sort of road design, we're obviously looking at, well, I guess what I should start off with primarily is road safety is around a safe system approach. So it's the different elements that we need to look at. So roads and roadsides is an area that we've, particularly from the agency side of things, have had a really strong focus on. Particularly on state highways, we're now looking to work with local councils and approved authority organisations to look at local roads as well. So it's about making quite a significant difference in terms of those deaths and serious injuries across the network. The other elements do come into it, so there's a whole load of work that the agency will be involved in, whether it's vehicles, whether it's speed limits, things like that. In terms of speed limits, really it's about, there's quite a bit of work being done within the agency to look at speed management, but also at a regional level, and your staff, Robin and the likes, will probably be a lot more informed around that. But actually, as a region, we're looking to see how we deal with speed management, because it's not really a case of just look at one particular road. You've got to look at it network-wide. So from that, in that road safety space, there's quite a lot going on, and obviously the minister's talked about developing a new road safety strategy. So we'll obviously be informed by that. What the agency is doing is really trying to just keep things progressing and accelerating some of that road safety work in the short term while we wait for that road safety strategy to be developed. When is that
strategy due again? I'm sorry. When is that due?
I'm not sure around the timelines around that, unless you are, Al, but...
It's going to be... So the strategy, which is led by Minister Genta, and as I foreshadowed before, there would be a second GPS which would also include the work that comes out of that strategy. So the time frame is making sure that's completed by 2019, early next year.
I mean, obviously I respect your communications. Your communications that was sent out to us will obviously cover the update on that, on the implementation of that, presumably. Next question is the, obviously, get the evaluation of the road corridors, but the Prairiri to sort of Kaimai area and the Prairiri to, say, Taupo Turangi, and my question is around the long-term design of a road corridor, whether it's a 2+1, a very high-quality 2-lane with medium barriers, bypassing some smaller towns, Te Poi, Hinu area, that kind of thing. Can you give us a sense of what long-term planning is happening? You know, that's separate from the actual issue of construction. It's actually future-proofing those routes?
So, as Patakawhi mentioned in her presentation, we are in a period of re-scoping and re-evaluation, re-evaluating existing work at the moment. That work's underway right now to help decision-making towards the end of, or towards the middle of next month. So in terms of long-term outlooks, I think I need to wait for those re-evaluations before we can sort of signal that, because those re-evaluations allow us to understand the alignment of activities, particularly from an access, a safety environment.
What's the timeline on those re-evaluations?
Middle of June.
Okay, so obviously again in your news, in your electronic communication is just, I think all of us here are deep, quite apart from Dave's and Leo's role, but all of us as ordinary councillors are quite deeply interested in that network issue. The final question, coming to the phase 2 of the rail program, you talked about there's a second policy statement coming around rail, and obviously that's the capacity of the network, but also the critical thing for success or not of a passenger commuter rail between the Hamilton along the corridor towards Britomart will be one, obviously the third line in Auckland, so that eventually train can go right to downtown Auckland, but secondly is speed. And I'm just wondering if what work, I assume in that phase 2 there will be work done around the impediments of the network, and I'm a layperson, a la the swamp bit, you know, in terms of how you know, the point is that for a train system in the long term to work, it must have a consistent fast speed. People must be able to get to downtown Auckland quicker than if they were in a car at a certain times of day. And I'm just wondering, just tell me I guess the scope of phase 2 and what input Waikato will have to that.
So in terms of phase 2, are you asking specifically about the rail component?
Yes.
Yeah. It's at this point it's difficult to determine what that will be. There will be involvement. This is being led out by the Ministry of Transport. The issues that in terms of around rail for that second part, it's going to be around ownership, some of those matters that you've raised around the current network that we have. But in saying that, if I go back again to the passenger rail service that we're involved in, the government has made provision through the transitional rail activity class for funding to be made available for those the capital expenditure.
I guess because my question is quite fundamental in the sense that you know, we as a major hub, rail and freight, obviously the veracity of the design or the capability of those tracks, particularly in in what I would call, with respect to Waimarina, the swamp area, you know, there are some blockages, and I'm just trying to think, I'm just trying to tease out if does one assume that those blockage issues will be addressed, or the discussion will happen around that phase 2?
Absolutely, and in fact, Kiwi Rail has already raised that particular section at Whangamarino, and it was also brought up at the Regional Council yesterday during their deliberations.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Leo.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I don't know whether you'll be able to answer these questions of mine or not, but I'm pretty concerned as to how we're losing track as far as our crash rates are concerned. Just looking at today's rolling road toll for the last 12 months, last year we were 341 and today we're 388, which is an increase of 47. So that's 47 people who have died in the first 5 months of this year compared to the last period of time. And here in the Waikato, of course, last year we were 24 and we're sitting at 33 this year, which will probably mean we'll finish up with about 70 deaths in the Waikato region for 2018. And my big concern is, of course, is when you go back to the 2000 strategy, which was no more than 300 deaths and 4,500 injuries by 2010. In 2013, nationally, we had a road toll of 253, which was fantastic. But last year, we finished up with 379. So the question is, of course, is the safe systems approach hasn't really worked as far as saving lives is concerned. And if there's any thought being given as to how we can actually get back to the great results we achieved from about 2000 through to about 2013. Is there any policy which has been developed by NZTA in that to try and drag this back if we possibly can?
You're absolutely right. This is a priority for the government and also for the agency, and it's why we have a dedicated safety environment team, which Harry Wilson, my predecessor, is leading and directs. The road safety strategy, which is being led by our Minister, Minister Genta, that is where the work is being done. It kicked off with a national summit at which Councillor McPherson and others were present that day across the Waikato, so it wasn't just Hamilton City, where she was very much looking for solutions and looking to be joined up with councils and also police see what we can do. Bottom line is that the toll is simply unacceptable, I guess, but it's our reality, and the focus for the government is on how do we go about reducing that. And she has a very ambitious target of what she calls Vision Zero strategy. But you know, that just want to give you a sense that it is a priority, certainly for the government and our minister.
Okay. And if I may have one further, I noticed, of course, that we've got a big increase in our fatalities of the over 60-year age group, and also the 25 to 39-year age groups. We used to have such a thing as an annual driver's test for those over 70s. Now, of course, it's just on medical. So is there any proposal to actually bring back some driver testing for the elderly people in the community? Or do we just leave it up to the medical profession?
I'll come back to you on that through
Thanks.
the committee, through the chair.
Yeah. Thanks, Leo. Look, I had a couple of questions, if I may. Sorry, Siggy. You just come on the board, sorry.
So sorry, I just slipped in because Councillor Truman said something I just want to follow on, and I think I've already mentioned a few times, but I keep hammering on about it because I think if we just keep looking at safer roads, we're not going to actually make that much, and we will make a bit of a difference, but it's safer people, safer drivers. That's really what it's all about. And when I look back at the 2 fatalities that just happened in Hamilton lately, and that while it might have helped a little bit with some safety measures, but one was a heart attack, and the other one, I mean, he was out to maybe, do some harm. So, you know, what can we do about that? You know, are we checking really what the fatalities are caused by? Is there something else we can look at instead of just safer roads? That's and again, that comes back to just having medicals isn't going to be the be all and end all either. So, So, I'm just wondering, is there any way we can look further than just safer roads?
Yes, there is, and we can. I guess that was your colleague's point, though, is the current safe system approach may not be delivering the results expected of New Zealand. And the work and the new emphasis by our new coalition government is asking us to retest whether we have the right approach.
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
Thanks. The questions I had, like what Southern Links, my understanding, Parakawhia, is that the design, everything up to construction is in the investment program, but the construction itself is not mentioned. So checking that that's correct, and what's the prognosis? How do we get the construction into the program?
So just to confirm, you're absolutely correct. So the Transport Agency investment proposal includes property and pre-implementation, which is in effect design of Southern Links for the state highway elements of that project. So not the HCC elements. Construction is not currently included within that 10-year plan. So in terms of, I suppose, providing feedback, then I think, you know, we'll just share that actually other councils and other partners have provided their feedback to the agency on that. And it was discussed at the RLTP deliberations on Friday as well, in terms of where Southern Links sits as a regional priority, and the fact that the construction phase isn't sat within our programme. One thing I'll probably just add to that my understanding is that it doesn't affect the development of peacocks. Those state highway elements won't prohibit any development. So really, from my understanding is what we've got to really be on top of is just understanding the staging and the triggers, so that we can act and make sure those state highway elements are in when they need to be. So it's really about us just kind of continuing our good work together.
I'd urge you to go back and check the design, because the part of the state highway W2 that is called Rains Road connection loosely, or colloquially, actually is what joins the State Highway network to the Peacocks Arterial Road network and formulates the boundary at the southern end of Peacocks. And in fact, provides the link from the road to come over the bridge through to the State Highway network, provides the only direct route. So to say that it's not part of Peacocks, it's not part of the Housing Infrastructure Fund application area of Peacocks, but it is part of the Peacocks Growth Cell. So I'd like you to have a look at those plans in that respect of that, because we will be, the city is contracted, if we go ahead with HIF, to build part of our southern links, but there'll be a gap that won't, until the rest of it's built, to connect with State Highway won't happen, and that's a gap.
So I think that's a good point, and we'll just go back and we'll check that, and we'll make sure that we're working with your team as well, just to make sure that we're all on the same page on that. So
yeah, thanks. The other issue also forms part of our future land use discussions with Waipa Council as well, and you'd be aware from the meeting last week that we had submissions from 2 major landowners in the area between the State Highway and Peacocks that wish to be able to start proceeding in that area. That's just information. The other one is the connection along Cambridge Road. I think you call it the Cambridge Road connection or something, but it's basically the off-ramp from the Tamahiri at the Hamilton bypass of the expressway through into Hillcrest. And I'm just checking the scope of that, because we've heard different stories. It'll just come to Riverlea, or it'll come up to and include the 2 roundabouts at Hillcrest, which the whole area is choked up every morning. What's the scope of NZTA's work? Is that going to go right through to both roundabouts?
So I can confirm that the scope of that is to the 126 intersection, so in effect Burger King roundabout. So from the Hamilton section interchange all the way through. So we're looking at State Highway 1 from the Hamilton section, so from the expressway section, all the way through to the Burger King roundabout, so 126 intersection.
That's the Morrinsville Highway where it comes in to meet.
The first of the 2 roundabouts you're talking about.
Southernmost.
So I can give you an update on the stretch further north, but this particular section, so if you went to our Transport Agency investment proposal, you wouldn't actually see it as an activity in its own right, so you'd probably look at it and go, oh, we're not doing anything, but actually the work is covered under the Hamilton section, so it is being covered. One of the things is our board has recently made a decision to fund improvements, if you looked at the papers, they talk about 4-laning to Riverlea, which is, I think, where that's come from. What we're actually going to be doing is looking at the scope of that work, and work with Waikato District and yourselves to look at what form those improvements need to be. So we're quite happy to work through the broadest range of options that we need to. So we're not at this moment able to say that it's going to be 4 lanes for all traffic. We're going to actually make sure that we're aligned with what the GPS is talking about, look at all modes. It's one of our primary entrances into the city, and it will continue to be so even after the expressway is open, and even with Southern Links. So we've got to make sure that we've got it set up right. And that just links back to the comment that Parakawhia made in the presentation around before we get going on this project, as we're working up the scope, that we've got an opportunity to come and maybe talk that through with councillors or with a task force around scope, or any thoughts just before we jump into the project proper. In terms of the bit further on, so there is work
between the 2 roundabouts.
So between the 2 roundabouts, but also the next roundabout, Cobham Drive, and what I'd class as local Cambridge Road, sort of that intersection, that roundabout. That work is underway at the moment. So some of the councillors around the table will be aware we did some we did open days, probably about started talking about that 2 or 3 years ago. So that work's just been progressing. So we'll come back and we'll again talk to yourselves, and we're working with your staff around the plans for that. But that's a lot more developed. That's been going on for a couple of years to look at options there.
That's not a local road though, is it? The entire stretch?
No. So that's still state highway, but the issue there is at that roundabout you've got that local road connection into Cambridge Road. So it's really about how that all works once the Wairere Drive connection's through. So it's really looking at the network. You know, our customers and our residents out there don't differentiate necessarily from a state highway and a local road. We just got to make sure that what we're doing on the state highway works with what we're all trying to achieve for the city. Yeah,
but so any upgrades to that because of the interregional traffic that uses it from two different directions to the south and east, that would be up to NZTA to do that work rather than the council, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. So that's a transport agency project, but obviously we're working with your staff to make sure that we're doing the right thing there. Yep.
Okay, thanks very much. There's no other questions there. Thank you very much for that report once again. It's good to see you every few months. We'd like to keep doing that. Really appreciate the relationship we've got nowadays with NZTA. It's good. Thanks. Okay, councillors, we're going back to the GM's report, but what I was proposing to do, we've got the Waste Task Force update. Oh, yep, sorry. Yep, okay, Gary's moved. I'll second that we received the NZTA report. Those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, Gary. Do the Waste Task Force update. That's on page 17 of the GM's report. But then, because the same people are involved, go on to 12 on page 203, managing plastics 3 to 7, so that we get both of those waste ones. And perhaps, Mari, do we want to do the straight after that, because you're here for all of them, number 13, the water, wastewater, stormwater, in that order? Is that okay? Oh, Andrew, so it's not you. So you're just doing the two hard waste, not water, not liquid waste. Okay. All right, we'll do those two now, if that's okay with everyone. Great, thanks. So firstly, the Waste Task Force update. Charlotte and Kirsty. Team. Okay, over to you, councillors. This is page 17 of the GM's report. Thanks.
Following the last meeting when Councillor O'Leary raised the question about the terms of reference, we went back to the task force and had a discussion about them. The key thing was that we'd had a change in timing around when the decision was going to be made on the contract, from last year it being awarded by December to it now being awarded in August this year, and also the change in the timing around the contract start date. So it was originally going to be in July 2019 and now it's changed to 1 July 2020. This has had an impact on our projects and the phasing. So we've reflected those changes in the terms of reference, which is included in the GM update today. And then the other parts of the task force report will take as read.
Okay, Councillor Angela.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that update. From what you said, in response to a question that I had at the last meeting about the terms of reference, I accept. But the report on page 17 and point 19, what the report asks us for is to continue. This says the proposed amendment includes a broad oversight of the implementation of the waste plan. So that it appears to me on the face of it that now that the waste minimisation plan has been adopted, that the working group, rather than continue with there's only one phase left, isn't there? Phase 2. So there's one task left for the working group. You want to, as we now go along with the waste plan minimisation, you want to have that up rather than coming to the full governing body to continue to go to that working group. Is that, am I reading that correctly?
You're right, yes. So on a regular basis, we will be meeting with the task force, so every 6 weeks, but all annual reporting, etc., will come through the governing body, so come either through this committee.
So why?
So it's around the strategic elements of what's happening with the waste plan. We have a 6-year plan which says we're going to do a lot. It's about identifying those strategic bits. What are we prioritising? So we talk a lot about event waste. We've obviously got the service change, but where is the task force focus in terms of the projects we are delivering?
So you're going to ask for a task force that doesn't have delegated authority to give you direction on what projects you want to do out of that plan first and what's important to them and etc. So this and
So collaborating and working with them to get that, especially around the service change element of that, which is a major project that we'll be delivering, which is in the new contract methodology and housing review components and the bylaw. So those are the key projects that need to be delivered.
And they sit. The contract sits under the waste minimisation plan. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
So what exactly, just on pages 42 and 43, what exactly has changed from the previous terms of reference? Because it's not changed, so I couldn't follow along.
The key bit was around, there was the phases of the timing, so they still had the same oversight, especially around the housing review and the service change, but the timing had altered. So the housing review was due to report back in April this year. However, because there's no sign-off on level of service as of yet, that project cannot be completed until we have a decision on what the service is going to be.
Okay, but for all main governing purposes, the waste minimisation plan is signed off, and the organisation now responds to that and implements that strategy. But you're wanting a 6-week, you're wanting the working group to continue to have updates and feed into you every 6 weeks, and the governing body, us, you will get an update once a year on that plan. Is that correct?
So 6 weekly through the GM update, there'll be a tracking of how we're progressing, and then yes, through the annual reporting. So that is around the targets made and the data of where we're seeing we are meeting those targets or not that have been set in the plan.
Okay, Mr. Chair, when you're ready, I am a little uncomfortable with that, and I'd move the staff recommendation minus B in the report, and I would talk to
minus
that.
B.
Minus B.
So, firstly, the references to pages 42 and 43, councillors, which is the terms of reference. So, and then going back to the report, which is on page 15, I think, is it? Yep. It's a little hard tracking all that way back, but we get there. Page 17. What's the B you're referring to, Angela?
Oh, sorry, on the recommendation on page 15.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I have some concerns around once a plan. I mean, the task force has done their job, and once a plan is adopted, I think the governing body is the reporting body to feed into that. For a variety of reasons.
Okay, we'll come to that.
Yeah.
I'm not taking it that. In fact, I don't see the proposal as that being the governing body. I think there's a difference. It's a reference body, but not a body. Maybe we can tease that out a bit. I think that may be the issue. I think the term that Charlotte used was guidance before, but we'll just check the wording of that.
Yeah.
Sorry, have you got other questions,
No,
Angela?
that's all. Thank you.
I'll come back to that at the end of the questions, okay? Gary, thanks.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you for the report. On page 27, on paragraph 27, beg your pardon, on page 18, you talked about the housing review, talked about some challenges, and then the key issues were, and those key issues all look to be as a consequence of higher density accommodation, intensification, etc. You've then said that, I think you've followed on to address those issues. You've said that all new properties are required to have appropriate storage. So are you talking about houses being built now, and part of the requirement is that you have a space where you can store your plastics? Is that what that's saying?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so instead, and store for how long and how much? How much quantity do you expect people to be storing on their properties? And how long will that be required to be stored on their property?
Assuming that the LTP gets all signed off with the new service in it at the end of June, then we're looking at a 240 wheelie bin every fortnight. So it would be on your basically a wheelie bin, a 120 wheelie bin, a glass crate, and a food caddy. That is the extent of the storage space.
Okay. So does that, you're talking to developers, does this mean there's a district plan requirement, or how do you enforce that?
Okay, well, a long-term solution may well be refining a district plan rule in there. Yep. Short-term, we're looking at different methods that developers can put in at the planning stage in terms of the ability for joint storage of waste, or within separate dwellings, the exact size required. We're just working through with them right now and the best option that will match the city going forward in terms of urban amenity, etc.
And how will that be implemented and regulated and enforced?
Okay, so when we review the solid waste bylaw later on this year and into next year, that's an area that we will be looking at to enforce such.
So this seems bizarre. So we're going to put in a whole lot of regulation, and presumably you'll have plastic inspectors who'll go around to check to make sure your property's safe and that it's not going to be burnt.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Pardon?
Is it a question or a
yeah,
statement?
I'm asking. Is this what you're suggesting?
So, storing your rubbish and recycling on our property. So storing our rubbish and recycling for collection, as we do now, is exactly the same as what will happen going forward. In terms of fire risk, that really happens when you're stockpiling large volumes for a long period of time and they degrade, and then you have a risk. In terms of our on-site collection, it will be...
So on-site is someone's house?
Yeah. So collecting from someone's house, a maximum it would be there for a fortnight.
Okay, so you have one of the big wheelie bins, and that'll have the 3 to 7s or all plastic?
So it's proposed in the wheelie bin that it would be paper and cardboard, tins, cans, and your plastics 1 to 7.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Siggy, thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your report. Just one quick question on page 18. Down the bottom, 32.32, the last F. I mean, whether it's with REAP or without REAP, we still would have to look at changing some of the district plan because of the storage and everything, isn't it?
We expect so, yes.
Yeah. So it would have to go ahead anyway somewhere along the line.
Correct.
Thank you. That's all I want to know. Thank you.
Okay, Garrett, so you've got another one? Yep.
So, and I know you don't like doing this, but later on, we're talking about managing plastics 3 to 7.
Yeah, we're coming to that after we do this bit, Gary. So can we hang fire on the plastics management until we do that report?
But these things obviously link, don't they?
Correct, and that's why we're doing them one after the other. If you don't mind, just on the plan, really. Look, councillors, on page 42 and 43, Angela's identified an issue for her, and I'm suggesting a slight rewording of that to cover off this area. So if you've got pages 42 and 43, I'm checking back with Angela if this, to start with, but all the council, of course. Halfway down the left-hand side, page 42, it's got reporting back and date, and I'm suggesting that first sentence be changed to reporting back will happen 6 weekly to the Growth and Infrastructure Committee for decision or recommendation to council. So in other words, rather than through the GM's update, because that may be a special report, that's but for decision or recommendation to council, making it clear that the Growth and Infrastructure Committee is the body that makes those decisions, or if it hasn't got delegated authority, it recommends to council. And right down the bottom on that same page where it says a reference, leaving that first bit in there to consider and provide guidance, etc., and then following that, noting that the governance body for the plan is the Growth and Infrastructure Committee, to make it clear that this is an advisory guidance body and not a governance body, that is this committee here. So that's my suggestion, because I think Angela, at least the point that I'm hearing is that the division is blurred and may be wrong. Angela, would you like to comment on that suggestion?
All I'm seeking, and this is absolutely no reflection of the great work that's been done and that has been led by the chair at all, I was just looking, and I think you probably have captured it around those lines being blurred, but that that the final decisions are made, because it's an important strategic document that's now been adopted, and one of the very core functions of the governing body is to monitor that. So, and either that or a similar outcome would be that because I think staff are looking for guidance on which actions you want to go for first. The other way to do that would be comfortable with the working group to hash all of that out and then recommend that to us. But I think what you're suggesting is just gives me that level of.
I'll just check with Councillor Mark as the chair of that. Do you think that's going to fit the bill?
I think that's some understanding of how the original one was meant to be anyway. We were never going to be a governing type sort of an thing. So, completely comfortable with that.
So details get thrashed around, discussed. The working group gives a report to here.
Recommendations.
This committee makes the decision. If it's too big for this committee, it flicks it on to council recommendation.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable with that.
So I've got those written down if staff need them, but it would be the resolution. Sorry, it's not easy to flick that far back on here. It approves the revised terms of reference to Waste Task Force Attachment 3, including the chair's revised wording. That would be part B there, which, if everyone's happy, we can deal with now. So it's the terms of reference, as you see, with that wording change I read out, and I'm happy to do it again if councillors would like. Otherwise, I think, well, unless there's more discussion, for sure, on that point. Is there any other? No one's on the board, so assuming people think that that's got to that point. So that's page, we're basically approving pages 42 and 43 with that wording change.
Approving a change in the terms of reference for the
this was a change anyway, and it's been reworded slightly for us to vote on it. And that's the actual part B. We'll deal with that now just by itself, because we'll do an overall accepting of the report. I'll move that, and seconded by Angela. You all right with that? Yes. Yep. Okay. Is there any discussion on that? If not, I'll put that show of hands. Those in favour, against, carried. Thanks very much for that. Oh, are you against? Okay. Sorry, thanks. I record one against. Councillor Mallett. Councillors, let's now move on to item 12, which is the plastics one that Gary was just referring to, which has got the same team. And that's on page 203, if you want to go to that. Kirsty or Charlotte, who's leading off with that?
So since this report was written, we've received some findings of some research was done by Wastemans, which is the sort of waste industry body in New Zealand. So I'll just quickly provide a verbal update on that to inform the discussions as well. So the Wastemans body went and interviewed councils across New Zealand and also the processors in New Zealand to understand what impact green soil have been having on those different bodies. So, for example, of the territorial authorities that did respond to the survey, they identified that 31 were now selling plastics 3 to 7 at a much lower price, or they were having trouble to find a buyer, or they were actually just stockpiling it. And in some situations, people noted that they were now landfilling plastics 3 to 7. Of the recyclers, they said the biggest impacts of China's green soil policy was on 3 to 7s for them, and that 4 of them were having to stockpile the material until markets improved because there was no market for them, or were 2 were selling it at a much lower price, and 2 were struggling to find anyone to purchase the material. So that's a bit of a snapshot of what we've recently just heard around plastics 3 to 7s management in New Zealand.
Is that going to affect our contract?
No, it's not at this stage. We've been in constant negotiation around that with the preferred contractor. We very much anticipate that by then, markets will have improved, but actually onshore processing will be here.
Okay, I've got Councillor Gary first.
Thank you. On paragraph 7, so page 203, paragraph 7 of your report, you talk, second sentence, a lot of material is being stockpiled as new markets and opportunities for material are being identified. That says nothing. So I've asked before when this has come up about the markets and been told a lot of gobbledygook. So the rubber's hit the road now, and we're all accepting that there is no market for this stuff. And this paragraph suggests that there will be a new market opening up just around the corner. Is that accurate?
So
page 203.
Partly accurate. There are markets.
Do you know where they are?
Yes. So in countries like Indonesia, Hong Kong, Malaysia, they are opening up. They're small, and New Zealand is not a big seller into these markets because you've got a lot of competition from other countries like Australia and the US. But they are there for good quality plastics. There are markets available, but they are small and they're growing at the moment. That's why our focus is really on onshore opportunities for the material.
So we've accepted that it's going to be a wee while and perhaps be a long while before we can export this stuff. So we've accepted we're going to have to do something with it here.
That's the general position that's being talked about between the recycling industry, central government and councils, yes.
Yeah. Okay. On paragraph 9, it talks about creating a resilient and sustainable market for recyclable material. Will require a coordinated approach by central government council. How does the council create a market for something?
So we collect a lot of the material.
Yep.
So in collaboration, not obviously we're small purchasers and sellers by ourselves, but by working collaboratively, we can actually influence a market. So where materials recovery facilities
like
might be established.
Like a cartel does?
No, not like a cartel.
Well, that's exactly what a cartel does.
Well, in terms of our decision making, do we collect plastics or not? That influences the market and the ability for onshore processing to be established. If there is no material or supply of material, then you're not likely to see it here. Whereas if we put material into the market, then that incentivises industry with the support of central government funding to establish.
Okay, so this paragraph 9 sort of just echoes the discussion we had about paragraph 7, doesn't it? Which is, remember, that there's no market and blah, blah, blah. And now you're saying, but we can make a market. What's the process for that you...
So,
and what's the timeline?
The central government, through the Waste Minimisation Fund in May this year, was really focused on projects that will either reduce waste or will look at building that resilience, so onshore processing. So that funding is highly likely to be going towards those projects. Just last week they announced funding for Astron Recycling to set up a plant up in Auckland for plastics 2 and 4. So we are seeing more money come through. The timing, that would be a guess.
Just on that, but okay, have you one in Auckland, who was that?
Astron.
Astron, okay, that's a public-private company obviously or something, okay. Have they got a market?
Yes, so what they'll be producing is then going to be able to make new plastic products, and that will be a marketable product.
And to what extent does it rely on subsidies?
So that
I mean, the Waste Minimisation Fund itself is a subsidy.
So that's about establishing the plant.
Yeah.
Once the plant is established, similar to Flight Plastics, which is processing PET, it's about establishing it, and then it is profitable to be run as a private enterprise.
Okay, so they still are reliant on exactly the same markets that we were reliant on. So nothing's changed. All you've got is another guy who will process the product, but we're still wondering where on earth the end customer is.
Well, the end customer will be in New Zealand, so they will be creating products like piping for irrigation, other materials, plastic-based materials. We just met the other day about how we can get more recycled plastic content in our wheelie bins that we're proposing to roll out. So looking at different avenues.
Making the wheelie bins out of recycled plastic, is that what you're saying?
Exactly, yes. So there's plenty of opportunity where a new plastic
that's a circle, isn't it?
Exactly.
Let's recycle.
You'll be able to throw out the whole thing without taking the rubbish out of it.
Every month you can recycle your recycling bin.
Hopefully not.
Wow.
Well, we recycle some councillors. Why not?
Yeah. And in paragraph 20, you kind of mea culpa that these new markets are small and there are large volumes trying to access them. I assume you're talking about the overseas markets, okay? Are you confident that the New Zealand market can consume at a economic rate the recycled plastic? And I'm not against recycling, I'm just against sensible economics.
Yep, and I agree.
And business cases that work without subsidies and things like that.
Let them answer the question.
So I haven't done a flows analysis to be able to say that for the country there is going to be the processing capacity and need for it all. That will need to be done, and that's something that central government is proposing to do to understand where to best locate infrastructure as well. So can't guarantee it, but combined with the focus on reducing waste, which is also a very important part of what we need to do, would be hopeful. But I can't guarantee that because we haven't done the flows analysis.
Okay there, Gary.
Timing based on this pretty good. You on page 38 again. You're prophesying some. You think it's about 2 years that the current market challenges will largely have been resolved.
Paragraph 38, did you say, Gary?
Sorry, paragraph 38. What did I say? Page.
Page, yes.
Yeah, sorry, I beg your pardon. Paragraph 38. It is in. Whose expertise was that based on?
So that's based on looking at what has happened with previous cycles. We've been in similar situations to this before where China have put up barriers and said, we don't want your material anymore. And other markets have improved and China's then sort of weakened their stance a little bit. So that's based on how those cycles have operated in the past.
Okay. And then in 39 you say that, well, you don't say exactly this, but until such time as the market recovers, this stuff has got to have, you can do whatever you like with it, but it's still got to be stockpiled somewhere, doesn't it?
So the recent study does show that some people are able to sell it into the market for the very clean product, but essentially at the moment it is a costly process because of the stockpiling that needs to be done. So there's limited export at the moment.
Okay, so it's going to have to be stockpiled somewhere. That could be stockpiled in a landfill, it could be stockpiled in people's houses, could be stockpiled in a warehouse until such time as the market revives.
So depending on the contractor for the council, so as obviously we don't collect this right now, and that's our continued recommendation is not to collect this material in the short term, but for those contractors who do collect it, yes, it's mainly being stockpiled in transfer stations. So as per their normal contract, they collect it from the curbside, gets taken to a location and gets stockpiled there at their transfer station.
Okay, so our transfer station here,
we don't collect plastics 3 to 7 in Hamilton, so there is no collection of it.
We made that decision last meeting, but it is in the new contract.
Yeah. So in the new contract, then that would, if the market doesn't improve, the it'll be down at the transfer station. Is that right?
So that's depending on the negotiations we're currently going through at the moment to make sure that whatever would happen with that, we're well protected. Like we talk about in the report, stockpiling of plastics does have risks. And so we would need that to be very well managed, and that's what the negotiations are dealing with at the moment.
There is no sort of cost analysis in here that I can find. Will we see something like that before we make a final decision?
Well, this report is just a report back for information deliberately, Gary.
So I'm asking for some information.
Cost information when we come to the contract prices will be there. You know, when that case to come back through council.
Okay.
Are we? You're right there.
Just there was a so-called desktop thing.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, engineering new materials. We talked about new technologies are potentially a solution in some plastic waste streams, blah, blah, blah. Where are we at with that?
So
I see that came from the Waikato AC. What's that?
University of Waikato. So we're currently working with them on a project around recycled plastics. We have some of the information is confidential in that partnership that we're working through with them at the moment, but it's basically to look at taking recycled plastics and adding a lot of value to them so that they could be used in very specific uses around plastics that have much greater integrity to them than, for example, normal recycled plastics.
What sort of volumes? The volumes that we need?
Potentially, there's definitely that opportunity there. It's in early stages. We're working with them around what that could look like in the future and connecting them up with the right partners within the waste industry.
Connecting who with the right
The university, so who have the technical know-how of how to do this process with those who have the industry knowledge and expertise.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Gary. Jeff.
My question was answered. It was very much along the lines of the worst case scenario in July 2020 if we haven't sorted it out. So that was answered. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Just want to thank you for that. I just want to focus on point 28, talking about how it's actually an opportunity in a way. Could you please elaborate on that on page 205.20? So though new markets will continue to open up in due course, the longer term opportunity is to develop onshore processing of the recyclables. So kind of like Gary's question, how big a hurdle is this financially to set up these?
Upfront investment can be high. However, that's where the role of central government and the waste levy funding is important.
Right.
And that was a great signal from the central government around where they wanted to direct their funding this year. We won't be finding the outcomes of that till October, so we're waiting to hear about those, but we're also working in collaboration with them on dealing with this issue. So there's a group of metro councils predominantly and central government who are working to understand how to best manage this going forward and to look at that need for integrated infrastructure across New Zealand. So looking at where the flows are, because the response, for example, for plastics 3 to 7 on the North Island is different to the South Island.
Yeah, in what way?
In terms of what volumes you've got coming through and what you're manufacturing at different locations. So cost of transport is very high in New Zealand, so you need to manage that in a way that you're putting your efforts into recycling near to your production.
Okay, so the gist of this is more on the reuse and reconstitution rather than the disposal of that stuff.
Correct.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Thanks, James. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. With our current plastic situation that we collect, where is that actually stored? Is that stored at our local dump?
No, it's not. We don't collect plastic 3 to 7. We're just 1 and 2.
The plastics we're collecting at
1 and 2.
So plastic, they don't store it at our site. So they take it to Edgar Street, which is their own waste management transfer station. It doesn't get stored there. It gets taken over to Tauranga, which is where it gets baled up and then for export overseas.
Oh, okay.
So they combine it with all their other contracts over there.
Okay, yeah, because I see that Huntly's Metro Waste Recycling Station has around about 2 metre high stacks that they're moving to Malaysia at the moment. So our ones are still currently going overseas?
Yes.
And District Council have 400 tonnes of plastic stored that they're finding hard to get rid of, and in Thames they've got 2,000 tonnes of plastic.
Yeah.
that they're still finding it hard to get rid of.
So the majority of those stockpiles are the 3 to 7s plastics,
Yep.
rather than plastics as a whole. 1s and 2s, where they are separating them through the collection, have still got fairly buoyant markets to go into. For example, in New Zealand, PET, so the number 1 plastics is recycled by flight. A lot of the council's materials are going there now.
Okay. So there's no, so I'll just clear in my mind, there's no current market for 3 to 7?
There's very limited export for very clean product, but it's up to the individual contractor in negotiating those as to whether they can access those markets or not.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Siggy, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you again for the report. Look, just one thing on page 205, 22. I mean, you're talking about that New Zealand, all over New Zealand, different crates, we've got different, everything's different. Would it be helpful to actually have it more uniform, or is that really just up to each council to decide what they want to do? I mean, it would be so much more helpful. Yeah. People move all around the country all the time, and they have to rejiggle and find out what they can do and what they can't.
It would definitely be more helpful. So Wastemen's, as the industry body, have come up with standardised colouring. So for each different type of, so your wheelie bin for rubbish would have a red lid. Your recycling bin for commingled recycling would have a yellow lid, to try and get some uniformity across the systems in the country. Ideally, it would be easier if everyone had the same system.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Mark, second bite.
Yeah, just happy to move. Actually, happy to move it if there's no more discussion.
Just so on that, there is the recommendation in front there, which note point B there as well. Mark's going to write a letter to the Minister telling them to get their A into G with... yeah. So... I'll second that. Gary, you got a question, or you want to speak?
Consistent. The letter's going to be consistent with this report, and this report just tells us, basically tells us how bad it is to collect. Well, not how bad, beg your pardon. How difficult it is to do anything economic with 3s to 7s currently, and we're waiting for the cycle to turn and all that sort of stuff. Is that what the letter will say?
Partly, yeah, and really emphasising, along with hopefully a lot of other councils, that we need central help when it comes to this.
We need someone else's money. We need some money.
No, just coordinated approach more than someone else's money, really.
Rather than someone else's money, Gary, Charlotte's answered before that the waste minimisation levy, which is collected from councils like us, is going to be used in this area. As an investment, so
yeah, I know what that is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's trying to reinforce, like there's a apply to that fund for money. Hamilton City Council going to apply, or is there a group of council going to apply?
Is it Charlotte? Yeah.
So I wouldn't suggest that that's the answer in terms of right now us applying for funding. It's more around where investment is going, so more into the private sector. But in addition to that, what I mentioned before around understanding flows and data around plastics, so that it's better informed, because that's a real gap in New Zealand right now, is actually understanding that information to make informed decision making.
So you're going to ask the government to find more about what's going on with 3 to 7s?
Correct.
And the only way we'd know that is someone checking the rubbish every day. Is it? I mean, without being silly about it, that's the only way you know, isn't it?
It's about collecting data from the contractor, so the recycling processes, and data from council. We get our data reported back to us through our contractor around what is collected, because there's the recyclables component of it, not the rubbish component of it.
Okay.
Okay. So we've got the recommendation or the resolution. It's number 3, paragraph 3 on page 203. Yeah.
Following on from the terms of reference discussion we had, do you want that letter back through this committee before we send it, or you're quite happy for me to send it? Or
look, I might.
Hey, no, that'll be right, mate.
My suggestion is that it's sent, but that it's copied to us.
Yeah.
so that we see it. I don't think it's going to change our expenditure or our policy in any way.
Yeah.
So I would recommend that it doesn't need approval by council, given the discussion we've had.
Yeah, just include it in the next report.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool.
So that's how I'd rule for that. So item 3, any other discussion? If not, I'll take a show of hands. Those in favour, against Councillor Mallett, thanks. That's carried. Look, councillors, I'd like to keep moving here on to the next part of the GM's report. Chris or Andrew, or Andrew and Robin tag team, okay. That's the Gordonton Road corridor discussion, which is page 18 of the papers. Who's leading off, Andrew or Robin? Oh, they're both pointing at each other.
I will. So the intent is to provide an update on what's happening both at a corridor level for Gordonton Road, but also the Thomas-Gordonton intersection. So we've got good direction from council for some previous meetings around the scope of the project, and I guess the key message from me is we're absolutely on track to complete the works by Christmas. These are just a couple of risk items that might be coming through, which I wouldn't want to raise any major concerns about, but they are some risks that are coming through. So one is subsidy. So NZTA has a process in play through the government policy statement, and some of the things that they're talking to you today about. They won't be in a position to make funding decisions until later in the year, around September. So there's a possibility, if we're to achieve the Christmas completion date, we as a council might have to make a decision to proceed without an absolute understanding of the subsidy position. So that's just a heads up. I'll come back to you and seek your buy-in if it comes to that, but that's just a matter we're working through. The other matter is the services. So there's some of the services out there are really challenging, one of which is the Transpower overhead 110 kV cable. Those conversations are going really well, but there's to land formal agreement with the utility authorities around what we're doing. But so those conversations are going really well. So those are the two kind of high-line risks that might have an impact on program. But at this point, we're pretty confident. We're looking at completion around late December this year. Part of that is changing the speed limit for the corridor, which I'll hand over to Robin on, and reinforcing that speed limit with works beyond the Thomas-Gordonton intersection. So Robin, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
I guess I'd just note that we have separate reports on speed limits, and there is a strong linkage between the two, obviously, but we will talk about Gordonton Road speed limit probably then will be better.
Okay, but that can be done within the same time frame as the construction?
Yes.
Yep.
They're intrinsically linked from our perspective, and the delivery will be integrated.
Thanks. Okay, we've got questions. I just might reverse the order. Since Jeff's been so quiet, he's going to get first go.
Thank you, Dave. Oh, shit, I just broke my glasses. Yeah, just regarding the NZTA subsidy, is there any reason why we should be worried about that? I mean, how does it fit into their formula? Would we be expecting the subsidy? I would have thought we would.
I think we've got a very strong case, but all I'm signalling is that there's a potential we may not get a decision from them in the time frame. In terms of the time, yeah. The construction program we're looking at. So it's just a risk, but they're working with us really well. And if that timing risk does come through, they're agreeable to us coming back to them, retrospectively. It could be a month in retrospect.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just they can't commit national funds until the whole national funding framework is landed and approved. Wanted to identify it as a potential risk or just around the time.
Note that Paracarfair actually listed that as one of the 4 things that they were most focused on for us.
Okay, so there's no reason why the business case shouldn't stack up.
That's our view, and we're working really well with the local office staff on it.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks. Mark?
Thank you. I was going to ask about the retrospective. So that's they have done that in the past, have they? Retrospective agreement?
Yes. I'm not sure they like it, but we, as a council, we have. They have held the door open to retrospective funding in the past, so it's not a new concept. No.
Cool. Thank you. As a part of the reconstruction or the redevelopment of that road, of the walkway, cycleway, actually diverting away from there.
Yeah. So the scope of this project is to look at the whole of the Gordonton Road corridor, but with an immediate priority to make improvements at Thomas Road. So we'll be coming back to council with that business case for the whole corridor. Okay. And that will absolutely deal with the walking and cycling. It's a very narrow corridor, and it's got some pretty significant stormwater ditches along the side. So there's limited opportunity, but we think there's opportunities to put the walking or cycling corridors through the unformed park. So it looks like it's beside the road, but technically it's in council reserve land. But we intend to come back to council once we've got a scope that we think is viable. But walking and cycling is absolutely part of it.
I guess that. No, but earlier to talk about that division then. Okay, cool. And can you please just remind me what's the ultimate outcome with the Puketaha intersection with St James? Is that going to be a little roundabout or an intersection, or what's there?
From a technical perspective, a roundabout would be best, but that would be a matter that would again bring to this council or this committee as part of the business case approval for your agreement to that.
Right. So and we have had that discussion, Mark, about design, the concept design.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I'm done. Thank you.
Yep. Gary, did you not want? You're right.
No, exactly the same question.
Oh, okay. Thanks. All right. Councillors, that's Gordonton Road. Let's do the Access Hamilton Task Force, which is Robin again, with Chris supporting you.
Yeah, different dance partner. Okay, so I guess for councillors we've had 2 meetings. Unfortunately, the second meeting was actually too close to having the agenda submitted, so I'll give a verbal update on that. But included in the report on page 19 is just a quick overview of the discussions that we had on the 3rd of May, which were primarily focused around the development of the discretionary transport program and the various types of projects that we were going to further develop as a result of that discussion. That led very nicely into the discussions that we had at the last meeting, which was on the 21st of May. So the key topics that we covered off at the 21st of May meeting was an update on the Te Awa cycle facilities. So this is the link from Hamilton City, from the gardens through to link up to the Waikato section and NZTA sections. So we do have funding in the draft 10-year plan for year 2, and that is coordinated with the other partners so that creates a seamless link. There is a section within that of 300 metres, which is a very windy section, boardwalk section, through an established area of trees, which are considered to be very significant. So staff are working through the options for that area and working with the local residents groups there. And what we're going to be looking at is it's likely that we're going to have a dismount length, but we'll look at a good alternative on-road option as well. We just need to work with NZTA around that. And we will continue to provide updates to the task force as we get further work developed. And I guess in closing, we also noted that with the Wairau Drive bridge into Peacocks, that provides another opportunity to actually provide a link on the, let's call it, southern side of the river as well. So making sure that we kept that option open in the longer term. We had an update on the public transport centre refurbishment and also the bus shed that sits in the corner of the public transport area. So we've got funding in year 1 to deal with what's currently just a maintenance shed. It's not really a function at the moment, and it does have asbestos and earthquake issues, so we've been working through what we need to replace that with, if we need to replace it. So we're working very closely with Regional Council to look at a facility there that will cater for drivers primarily, so it's somewhere for them to have some meals, to have toilet breaks, those sorts of things, and also to deal with minor changes, like changes of tyres and that sort of thing for buses, or giving a bus a clean out if it's needed. So that's planned for year 1. The Transport Centre rejuvenation is planned for year 2 currently, and that's a more major piece of work, really orientated towards improving the levels of service for bus users, trying to provide somewhere that's actually wind and waterproof when you're for your bus, and that does also look to cater for the likes of cycling and other sorts of needs as well. So early stages for that one. We'll be looking at getting design work underway next financial year, so in a few weeks' time, and we'll continue with the task force on that one as well. The third topic we talked about was in relation to cycle waste separators. So this is a piece of work that's been delivered through this year's discretionary transport program, and is the use of small raised plastic strips with some vertical components like hit sticks to encourage cars not to pinch cyclists in their cycle lanes. So we've been looking at various locations and have decided upon 3 in River Road that we'll be trialling there. We'll be doing some early work with cones and that sort of thing, just to understand the implications of that before we then put them down, and we'll then continue to monitor from there. So that was just getting that sort of sign off. Further to the previous meeting, we started looking at actual designs for the discretionary transport program. So this was some early work, hand-drawn pictures of the types of improvements that we were planning to do. So we will continue to take these through the task force before we finalise an actual program of works to be delivered through that program. Okay. And then finally, I think it was finally, we had basically an opportunity for councillors to raise various issues that were coming out from the LTP hearings, any issues that they wanted us to start investigating and to consider for inclusion in discretionary transport program. So I think that's a quick overview. There will be minutes from this made available to councillors once we get them tidied up a little bit.
Thanks, Robin. Okay, questions on the report, both of the 3rd of May meeting, which is down here in writing, or the 21st of May verbal report from Robin, which will be followed with minutes. I've got Gary first.
Thanks, Robin. Interested in your, because I've heard of this discussion about separation between cyclists, and I totally understand it's, if you get it right, it'll be a great boon. Can you just expand a little bit on what you just talked about then? Because there are times when a vehicle would legitimately go into a cycle lane. For example, there's a pedestrian in the middle of the road and you're trying to avoid them, or there's a car parked there and that sort of stuff. What are the things you were suggesting?
So they're a raised plastic, like a very low profile speed hump, but about yay wide, I suppose.
So those little discs on different, those things.
Yeah. So.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
I think that might be the technical term for them. Yeah.
The ones you drive over, are they, Gary?
Yeah.
Want to wake you up.
So we do have cat's eyes, or raised pavement markers.
Yeah, cat's eyes.
Yeah. So no, they're different to that in the fact that they are a length. So more like a speed hump, but instead of going across it, they run parallel with the travel. Okay,
and so they work by just alerting a driver that you've veered into the cycle lane.
And it's to try and keep them them out of it. And we're not looking at putting them everywhere. It's just at key sections, right at intersections and that sort of thing, where we are observing safety issues for cyclists because the cars are queuing across. Okay. So yeah. Is
for a million years you're not allowed to drive a cycle on a footpath, but the risk of damage. A cyclist hitting a pedestrian could cause some damage.
Can cause death.
But
We have had one in Hamilton.
Okay, but on average, you're talking about shinned knees, you know, whereas a car hitting a cyclist frequently would end in death. So is there any thought of, and smarter brains than mine, you know, would ever thought of that as a safer combination of modes of transport rather than...
Yeah, so there's been a lot of work done nationally looking at where it's safest to put cyclists. And there was actually a petition to government around just allowing cycling on footpaths full stop. So that sort of work is ongoing. I guess that while that might be a great improvement for cyclists, there is increasing use of footpath space for not only people walking but people in mobility scooters, that sort of thing as well. So the footpath is actually becoming a very busy environment as well, and it's trying to balance those needs. The other thing we've got to be very aware of too is cyclists on footpaths, depending on where that footpath is located, if it's hard up against the boundary, then you do get cars backing out of private properties and that sort of thing. If they haven't got good visibility, then again you've got this real risk that your cyclist at speed actually hitting a car, and then you've got that whole stopping suddenly.
Whereas a walker or a jogger would tend to be able to slow down.
Yeah, and potentially would hear, and yes, yeah. So they're the sort of things that we need to balance off, those sort of the safety benefits versus
primarily the separation. If you've got different modes on a footpath, it's generally a matter of courtesy, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. As opposed to on the road, if you make a mistake, you kill someone. Yes. Or you could kill someone.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Are there any other questions? If not, thanks very much. Oh, sorry, Leo, sorry.
Trial period on River Road.
Yes.
For what part of River Road are you looking at?
There were 3 locations that we worked through. So one, and I can get you more detail, Leo. So they were, there was one for southbound traffic approaching Wairere Drive, where we've got some really good evidence of vehicles not only driving down the cycle lane, but they're actually putting a wheel up and driving along the footpath as part of that as well. So it's trying to not only improve cycle safety, but I guess also pedestrian safety at that location. Yes.
To make the left-hand turn.
Yeah, to make the left-hand turn. Yeah. So there was one there. There was one. Yeah, I can't remember. Sorry, I'd have to get you the details of those.
Yeah, I've just had a few cyclists who have said to me that they consider Te Rapa Road the most dangerous spots that they have to cycle in the city.
Yeah.
With the cars parked on their left, they got the small part and then 2 lanes of traffic.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So I guess we're just trying to put a toe in the water, see how this one goes, and take the learning from that before we go and roll out to other locations. So we'll certainly be keen for looking for other if it goes well.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, thanks very much for that. Chris, you better stay there for this one. Page 20, councillors, the submission on the draft investment assessment framework for the National Land Transport Fund, and that's on the actual letter is page 48. If you're wanting
44.
to...
44.
Is it? Oh, okay, why did I say 48?
I think 48 is the attached bit, which is our GPS submission.
Oh, okay. I can't keep up with them all. Sorry, okay. 44.
So
44 is the thing we need to approve, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry.
Yep. So if I can just set the scene. So you heard Para Kawhia today in her presentation talk about the government policy statement, which is their statement on what outcomes they want and where they want money to be spent. It's submitted already to that government policy statement, and it is attached to the submission that we're talking about now. So that was the one on page 40, starting 48. It was just relevant in terms of consistency between the two that we attach it to send to the NZTA. So what we're submitting on today is underneath that policy statement is the investment assessment framework. So this is NZTA's view on how they interpret the government policy statement. So it's very important for us as a sector that they interpret the government policy correctly. So we've put in a submission. It's subject to approval by the council today. We very much wanted it to be consistent with the GPS, which is why we've attached it. There is just one change that we've made to the draft submission in front of you today, and we've added a new item 3.7 under financial assistance rates on page 45. So if I look at the section financial assistance rates, what we're saying there is we really support the move to improve safety and to help local government. We are suggesting that part of that is that we have an enhanced financial assistance rate. So instead of getting 51% from government, we get something like 75% from government to help the uptake of local government to deal with their safety issues. We've proposed another clause there which is the same for public transport infrastructure as well, and suggesting that they look at an enhanced financial assistance rate to help us with public transport. And the reason we put that in is because this new government has clearly signalled a real focus on safety and access. So for access, for us in the metropolitan sense, is things that help public transport and walking and cycling. So that's the only change that we've made to the submission, is an addition of 3.7, which is suggesting enhanced financial assistance rate for some of our public transport infrastructure. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Gary.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you for this. Look, I've just got a whole lot of points down here where I've said there's simply no demand, simply no demand, simply no demand. It strikes me that we're applying for funding or suggesting government should spend money or time and effort on, and I'm not against cycling, and I've said this so many times, but we seem to be missing. There's this. Our people throughout the nation have decided that they will do, and I'll get the figures wrong here, but 75–80% of their transport travelling, and probably more, in private cars. We seem to be trying to spit into the wind. I was going to say something else into the wind. Spit into the wind, and pretend that the demand is there for these other things. I mean, you know, I just down the other day and bloody buses are slowing, buses turning left for a pedestrian going across the thing, stop the whole red cycle, you know, the red light, green light cycle. No one gets round except for the bus, and the bus has got 2 people on it. I just hope we do, you know, with open eyes, get some objective data on how many people are using these things. I just read in the papers the other day that, it was in this report here with this, the growth report or whatever it was, that Hamilton's registration of cars has increased by 10% or something like that. There's been a 10% increase in cycling or skateboarding or bus usage anywhere. Yet we just keep on flogging this dead horse.
So
and
the
I know
question, Garrett,
that's my concern is we
no. So does he agree with your concern?
Well, I mean, I'm quite serious. I mean, we just.
Well, I'm giving you a fair.
I know you are. I know. So I guess I just disagree with this because we are ignoring the fact that that people have made their choice, and I think it'll get, you know, as car technology improves and whatnot, that we're going the wrong way. So my concern, I guess, is probably debate rather than
I'll take that as your one shot at debate. Yeah. Okay. Are there any questions? Okay, councillors, you've got the submission in front of you. I'm going to go back to page 15, I believe. That's because that's the end of the GM's report.
Are we asked to approve that?
As part, if you look at staff recommendation, page 15, we've got, I'm just pointing out, B has been dealt with.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah.
C specifically refers to that.
Yeah.
I'm going to move, just for the sake of ease, that we receive the report, and seconded by James by itself. Get that out of the way. Those in favour, against, carried. unanimous. Then we're going on to C, because we've already done B, and I'll also move that, and it's seconded by Jeff. I'm not going to speak at this point. Gary has already spoken. I might allow him an extra 1 minute, but sorry, the General Manager wishes to speak in the debate.
Through you, Mr Chair, could we amend C to add to the end, subject to the addition of an extra clause requesting enhanced financial assistance rate for public transport, please?
That's the 3.7.
That's the clause 3.7.
So we'll just wait for staff to get that noted.
Could you please repeat it?
Subject to the addition of a clause requesting enhanced financial assistance rate for public transport activities.
Could I ask all councillors and staff, if they know amendments in advance, that they take them up to staff so they can prepare them?
Yep.
So then we don't have hold-ups?
No, I didn't.
He came into the meeting this morning, I bet, with it.
Just so for financial assistance rate, and what was the words after that?
For public transport activities.
So we're all clear on what that is, just the addition to the letter. So while we're there, we've got Jeff, you can have your turn at debate now. We'll get that up on the board as soon as we can.
Respond to Councillor Mallett's angst about cars versus public transport, and I understand where he's coming from, and you know, he certainly makes a point, and he's made it before, and that's fine. I think the thing that we need to remember is we've actually got a new government in now. We've got a government that actually is wanting to invest in access the fastest way possible, be it vehicle, be it public transport, rail, bus, cycle, whatever. And whereas in the past, I think the opportunity, the investment hasn't been available for public transport, cycle lines, etc., it now is. And so the feeling, my feeling certainly is, yes, in the old days I wouldn't get on a bike, but if there's decent cycle lanes off-road, safer options, then I may well do so. And if decent bus service, I may well take that as well. I won't take it on the days where I'm taking my dogs to doggy daycare, but I'll be able to take it on the other days, or, you know, when I'm dropping the kids off school. But there may be 2 days a week where I'll be able to take a bus. So I think you need to remember we are living in a different environment now, where there is actually some interest from the government in investing and helping us to invest in it.
Thank you, Councillor Mark.
Open the gate now, so we're into it. Hey, yeah, I'd endorse those most recently previous comments with regards to the demand, and I'll this point as well. If yes, there is demand for cars, and cars are getting more and more used, quite simply because we have been so biased towards the car with our transportation design over the previous decades that, of course, there's going to be demands. The facilities are magnificent. All I would suggest is that we rebalance that a little bit and make at least the ability to cycle and walk and take public transport a little bit more attractive, so that choice is there. Congestion is becoming a big issue, not just for safety, but for congestion, so therefore for economic well-being of a city. If we're looking at building suburbs right out on the edges of town, it's only going to become bigger, and our nature is such that we're a river city, so we have 5 or 6 bridges that people have to squish across every day, at least twice a day, and so we have reasonably unique geographical restrictions, which mean we've really upped the game when it comes to alternative transport. Secondly, we're a flat city. And we are behind, if you'll recall, way back, Claire Sherrington gave us a report on our ratio of cyclists compared to the other cities. Demand for the other cities is showing that, cycling has gone up big time in that, and we're lagging sadly behind, which is a little bit embarrassing because we're so flat. We're so perfect for cycling, we're so perfect for walking. Whereas even Dunedin cold old hilly Dunedin is outrating us in the amount of cyclists it has and its cycling infrastructure as well. So it's not a matter of which is a better mode of transport, which is more available to people. And, you know, I'd probably pay money to see Jeff cycle to work, actually. So I'm in.
Thank you. Councillor Siggy.
Thank you so much. I just want to make one comment. It took Copenhagen and a number of cities in Europe 50 years to become a public transport friendly cities. So what are we trying to achieve in 1 year? I mean, we're trying to achieve the same in 1 year, which is never going to happen. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Gary, limited second
Well, I
speech.
mean, I'm glad Siggy said that, because have we got 50 years? Have we got 50 years to wait? Have we got 50 years of spending other people's money on something that's not working? I mean, you've just proven it. You've spent so Copenhagen spent 50 years of spending other people's money to try and coerce people onto bikes, and the private car is getting better and better all the time. It just concerns me. We are facing some very, very stringent economic times. No one seems to be, I mean, and this is the problem, because we don't have customers, we have captives. Clearly, the people have chosen themselves, given that they are prepared to sit and wait at bridges and things like that. They are making their choices because the car is simply extremely convenient. And I've said this before, you go to work, you pick up the kids, you go to the supermarket, you do all sorts of things. Things you can't do on a bus. You just can't do them on a bus. So anyway, you know, I don't know if it's appropriate to say you're closing your eyes and sort of putting your fingers in the air, but you are just missing reality so badly.
I'm going to speak with my right of reply now. Waited until after Gary had done it, you see. This is true, so it's just quite a standard response. Yeah, 50 years, and it did take that long. Amsterdam, I certainly know that when I was over there speaking to them 2 or 3 years ago. It didn't just happen overnight. It didn't happen without a start, without a conscious decision to actually change their investment plans. We're looking forward to several more years. Gary says of private cars because they're more convenient. There's another thing they're doing very well at the moment, and Leo highlighted we're doing very well. It's killing people. They're killing more in greater numbers than we've ever had before. So there's a safety issue with cars, and it's not. Bikes in Hamilton City have killed one person ever. Cars have killed hundreds of people, and they're killing thousands of people every few years around the country. But in reality, by far, I think this is quite an unbalanced investment thing of the government's at the moment, because you actually look at where the money's being spent, where this council's spending its transport money, by far the largest proportion is being spent on facilities for cars. So what we're trying to do is actually turn the ship not 180 degrees, but about 1 or 2 degrees to the side. There's just enough room for the cyclists and walkers to squeeze through where there wasn't any room before in many cases, and quite literally on some of our streets. There is still going to be, despite this plan of the government's or our Access Hamilton plan, still going to be by far the most amount of money in transport spent on car transport. So Councillor Gary need have no worry. He is going to be able to drive his car, provided he can afford the petrol or the electricity, for many years to come. No one is going to stop his car and drag him out of it and make him walk, or anyone else in the city. The other point I had was I like Councillor Jeff's speech, and I'm really looking forward to him cycling uphill to his new place in Western Heights. That'll be a good photo to get. It'll be good in your election campaign, Jeff. Thanks. Seriously, councillors, we actually need to take this in perspective, and I think Gary's got it in perspective. We're trying to do the sorts of things that Mark and Jeff And Siggy talked about we're trying to add something in on top of what's already there, which is pretty damn good facilities for cars, pretty hopeless facilities for anything else, except maybe horses. Okay, that's it. So well, let's go to the board here, councillors, for voting. And the resolution is up there, is it? Yes, it's subject, yep, thanks. I was looking for red. Okay, so for and against that, thanks. It's just the bottom bit. Yeah, we've already received. The top one's been done, yep. It's carried 9-1. Thanks very much. Councillors suggest we break for lunch for 40 minutes, come back at 20 or 37, come back at 22 2. Is that all right? Thanks.